on the behalf of workers in this country. And we are grateful, Mr. Speaker, sir, for those, like I said, who go beyond the efforts, who go beyond the norm, and who continue to exercise the level of leadership that is necessary, Mr. Speaker, sir, in this effort. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honourable Member for St. James North, in his presentation, spoke about the work, again, of the Honourable Member at the ILO recently in the passing of Convention 913. I draw attention again to that, Mr. Speaker, sir, because I want us to recognize as a country that this is a 193, correction, Mr. Speaker, sir, Convention 193, that this was a seminal convention. For the first time, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have recognition of decent work for gig and platform economy workers. Mr. Speaker, sir, that is workers who work remotely, who work on platforms like Uber, and I know that we have our own, like here in Barbados as well. People who operate in a space in which previously what happened was that employers did not want to be able to pay them the minimum wage that was established. They did not want to be able to pay them, Mr. Speaker, sir, all of the rights and all of the dues that others had in the context of decent work. And that effort, Mr. Speaker, sir, was led by the Honourable Members for St. Peter, who chaired the session. The Honourable Member for St. George North was the Vice Chairperson representing workers. And then Barbados also as well had representation on the drafting committee, Mr. Speaker, sir. Barbados, this little island, 166 square miles, is known for its leadership internationally in the ILO and delivering not just for this country, but globally. Globally, Mr. Speaker, sir, something that will reform the way how workers are treated internationally. And that is the level of leadership that we have. That is a level of leadership that is exercised by the Honourable Members, but also as well that is expected from this government. And that ethos on how workers should be represented, again, as I said, Mr. Speaker, sir, it's part of our very DNA, this government and of the party, the Barbados Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, sir, as you would know, in my former capacity, working in culture, we are in the season of emancipation, a season where we reflect on our history, the triumphs, what has made us, what has shaped us as a country. And it dawned on me, Mr. Speaker, sir, that on July 26, we will commemorate the day of national significance. That day recognizes the 1937 riots, just across the street in Golden Square. The 1937 riots represented fundamentally the contestation between workers and owners of capital. It erupted as working class people had reached up to their neck, Mr. Speaker, sir, with the conditions that they were living in and forced to endure under a capital class that continued to see them as less than, that continued to see that the exploitation of the working class was the only way for capital to continue to thrive. That erupted in the 1937 riots. And I reflected as well, Mr. Speaker, sir, how interested it is that we are here in 2026 as we debate this bill, in conditions, in some spaces in which you have workers who face those very same conditions. Most Barbadians would have learned at some point or heard about the Moyne Commission, who looked into those conditions that those workers were faced with at that time and talked about the poor working and living conditions, the lack of sanitary conditions, Mr. Speaker, sir, interesting, the lack of proper housing, proper wages, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is interesting that we live in a system in which capital and those who own can still see the exploitation of workers as the fundamental way that they are to continue to profit. But we don't often speak, Mr. Speaker, sir, about what happened after the 1937 riots. Because after the 1937 riots, in 1938, it gave rise to the Barbados Progressive League, the Barbados Labour Party. In 1941, it gave rise to the Barbados Workers' Union. And under that Barbados Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, sir, we saw some of the most progressive labour legislation that moved those very same working class people from out of those conditions that they were forced to endure into a place of growing empowerment. During that period, Mr. Speaker, sir, we had legislation that had to do, Mr. Speaker, sir, with the Representation of People. In 1950, the Representation of People Act, Mr. Speaker, sir, moving away the right to vote from out of the hands of privilege and making sure that ordinary Barbadians could exercise that right. It was in 1951, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we saw the foundation bill for the bill that we are debating today, the protection of wages, Mr. Speaker, sir, in 1951. And in 1952, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Labour Clauses Public Contract Act. We also had during that period as well the Wages Board Act, the Workmen Compensation Act, Mr. Speaker, sir. There is a history and legacy of the Barbados Labour Party government working and fighting on the behalf of people. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is like building a house. When you put the first block, you don't see the shape of it. But you add another and another, and you reinforce it. And the thing begins to take shape. And that is what this government has been doing, block by block, over time, over time. We would have heard the Honourable Member for St. Peter talk about the number of pieces of legislation that has been brought since this government has taken over 2018. Mr. Speaker, sir, block by block by block, we are building on a legacy of representation of people and of workers, Mr. Speaker, sir. So, as I thank the Honourable Member for his work, I know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that he understands and feels the weight of that legacy. It is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I would also say that even as we judge governments by what they promise in a manifesto, that perhaps we also need to look at what is done quietly just because it is fundamentally right, even if it isn't promised up front. Just because it is fundamentally right, Mr. Speaker, sir. And again, I am proud, Mr. Speaker, sir, to stand in a government that understands that the fundamentally right thing is the important thing to do. Mr. Speaker, sir, I could not let the opportunity to speak to this bill pass. I spent a number of years in the nonprofit sector, and particularly working with labor unions, doing training, advocating for rights, leading a number of demonstrations. Mr. Speaker, sir, I was a little bit of a rebel, sometimes against governments. And therefore, standing in a government and being part of a government that recognizes the fundamentally right things is important on a personal level for me. The government, labor union, and the private sector in 2003 signed what we refer to as an agreement on the critical missions for this country. One of those missions, Mr. Speaker, sir, spoke to the notion of empowerment of people, empowerment of workers. And sometimes you think that empowerment means that we only provide increases in wages. But that is only one plank of empowerment. Empowerment is also about agency, about giving workers voice and space as well. This protection of wages bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, at Section 19 of the bill says particularly, notwithstanding any other provision of this Act, an employer shall ensure that an employee with special needs is given notice by a method of communication that readily permits the employee to receive and understand the notice. Given agency, allowing workers to take up space, acknowledging that workers' rights are also fundamentally about social justice. At Section 19, what this means, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that not only has this government, because in 2025, we passed the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, ensuring that businesses have to, at an infrastructure level, make sure that there is access for people. Ramps, Mr. Speaker, sir, retrofitting of bathrooms, etc., so that people with disabilities have access. This goes one step further, Mr. Speaker, sir, the House. Block reinforcement, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because this now says to businesses, binding the crown as well, Mr. Speaker, sir, that not only at an infrastructure level do you have to make changes to facilitate people with special needs, but you have to change your process as well. Your process of how you communicate and give notice. And that is critical. So it puts businesses, Mr. Speaker, sir, on notice that if you have to hire and train people for sign language, the technology that might be needed to be able to facilitate this communication, Mr. Speaker, sir, has to also happen. Social justice, the idea that we will not discriminate, that we will see and feel people, all workers, and in this case, Mr. Speaker, sir, those with special needs. And this is fundamental for me, Mr. Speaker, sir, again, because of what we did in 2025 and the recognition that this government is not putting before the people of Barbados one-shot pieces of legislation, but that we are building coherence, Mr. Speaker, sir, throughout pieces of legislation, again, to make sure that those rights are shored up and reinforced. Shored up and reinforced. Mr. Speaker, sir, also as well in this bill, I want to draw attention to Section 9. Section 9 is consent for deductions, Mr. Speaker, sir. We talk a lot about technology, and I am all for technology to a certain extent. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, I find that when we talk about the use of technology and how positive it is and how it can help us to work faster and more efficiently, sometimes we don't recognize that in doing so, we lose sight of people. We lose sight of the human factor. We lose sight of acknowledging that things happen to people. That when we automate systems, we don't take cognizance of the worker who just had to bury the mother or the father, or the worker who shows up on the job because they're faithful but they're not feeling so well, or the worker who is stressed and dealing with multiple things, family members, taking care of family members and showing up to work. Sometimes we don't always see people. And that is also a function of how capital operates. Because the intent is not to see workers, it is not to see individuals, but it creates separate lines of work, and that people no longer care about the other and the other circumstance and the way. We care about the rules and the process and the systems, Mr. Speaker, sir. Section 9 says, notwithstanding Section 7 and 8, money shall not be deducted from the wages payable to an employee without the written consent of the employee, unless the deduction is required by another enactment. Wages, money shall not be deducted without the written consent of the employee, Mr. Speaker, sir. And we may see that as slight, Mr. Speaker, sir. Something that's either obvious or, something that should be a rule of thumb. And why therefore would we have to be able to legislate it, to put it into a bill, Mr. Speaker, sir? Again, because the system does not often see people. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, today, I want us to see people. I had a young man call me a couple of months ago. Now, he messaged me first, Mr. Speaker, sir, on the Friday. And he said to me that he was entering, the week coming would be 4 weeks, and he had not been paid. He was supposed to be paid every 2 weeks. He called me on the Friday and said, this was week 3, next week will be week 4, and he had not been paid as yet. So I was saying, well, why you call me at this time, it's the end of that week, the end of week 3, it can be hard to help, understand the circumstance, but, it can be a little bit difficult. Mr. Speaker, sir, you know what he said to me? He said, but why should I have to call you my MP? I am calling you only as a last resort, because he said, I have worked. I turned up at my job and I put in an honest day's work. Mr. Speaker, sir, he said, I don't even like the job. I don't like it, but I turned up every single day and did my job. Why am I not paid? And you know what else he said, Mr. Speaker, sir? He said, I have come to you because when I ask, why am I not paid? Nobody is responding. I can't get through. Nobody is picking up the phone. My supervisor telling me he ain't know. I got to call accounts telling me them ain't know. Call treasury. I have worked, Mr. Speaker, sir, but I cannot get my pay. Mr. Speaker, sir, we know the adage, what? A hungry man is a who? An angry man. A hungry man is an angry man. Mr. Speaker, sir, the account section might not have known that young man was trying to get his life together. That he also said to me, Mr. Speaker, sir, what is it that they want me to do? They want me to go back out on the streets because I have 2 young children to feed. The child mother has died. I am raising these kids on my own. What do I tell them when their belly's hungry, Mr. Speaker, sir. We don't see the circumstance. Accounts ain't interested about that. Their system is their system. You get paid, you don't get paid. Nobody ain't looking, nobody ain't checking. Why, Mr. Speaker, sir? Because for them, as monthly workers, their pay secured. So we have created, even within the working class, a division now between those whose salaries are so-called secured and the wage laborers. So the wage laborers have to turn up to work and feel that they are less than and beg somebody for monies for work that they have done, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I can repeat, he said, why should I have to call you? I turn up every day and work at a job that I do not like. But nobody is hearing, nobody is seeing, nobody is taking care. So he had to turn then to his MP to try to work out a solution. I had another case, Mr. Speaker, sir. Another young man, again, called because, you know what happened, Mr. Speaker, sir? They deduct his wages and he didn't know why. They said, they pay me short. They pay me short, Mr. Speaker, sir. And of course, Mr. Speaker, sir, no. You were going to ask where to come into the MP, I'm not sure, but because we can solve all the problems, but that is it. And when we ask the question, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is nothing on his pay slip, no description, no breakdown of what the money he's getting paid is for, what coming up for NIS, what coming up for nothing, he paid a sum. You work from this place to this place, this is the sum here that you're getting. He get paid short. Mr. Speaker, sir, when investigate, I said calm down, because remember what I said, 3 things. This is about social justice. And I also said a hungry man is an angry man. A hungry man is an angry man. So when we investigated, account said he had been paid extra before, so they were taking it out. He had been paid extra sometime before, they only found it, and then immediately, without any discussion, nobody ain't write nothing. Nobody ain't call him and say, son, listen, you make an error 3 weeks ago, you know, so we can go correct it. So we can go take out. Mr. Speaker, sir, take out every cent one time out to the paper. 1 cent. Every cent, Mr. Speaker, sir, 1 time. That is why, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we have to make sure that the system sees, feels, and hears people. Well, things that would appear obvious, we have to be able to legislate. We have to be able to legislate in order to protect workers' rights, to protect people, so that where the system, again, would want to continue to differentiate, we call it the division of labor, that we continue to see the working class people, that the system wants us to turn a blind eye to. And that is what I am going to, that is why, Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm going to suggest to the Honourable Member for St. Peter that one of the things that has to happen in the context of this bill, hopefully when it is passed in this chamber and in the other place, that we must also make sure that there is communication that goes to all of those who feel now that they have risen to the top and are in charge of how and when people get paid, so that they fundamentally understand. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we love to send a memo. You know, in the public service, the first thing we just hear is a memo was sent. And then when you ask who see the memo, nobody see the memo. The memo went up into some space that nobody can find. So it has to go deeper, Mr. Speaker, sir, than just saying that we will send a memo. But there has to be an awareness raising of the issues. And not just, Mr. Speaker, sir, about saying this is what you have to do, about fundamentally removing that barrier and having a discussion about the why it is important for people to be able to get paid. For you to be able to write and get consent from somebody when you want to be able to take out their pay. And the Act, Mr. Speaker, sir, does say that the employer does have the right to reclaim when there is overpayment. But it then says you must let the worker know. And whether, Mr. Speaker, sir, that means that somebody has to go into the account section, whether that means we give it to the head of the account section, the financial officer, to be able to sit down with their teams and be able to say, hey, look. So that outside of the automation, outside of what we do as the norm, Mr. Speaker, sir, again, that we see, that we hear, that we feel people fundamentally. And that is why this protection of wages bill is important. Mr. Speaker, sir, this bill also indicates that there's only a certain percentage of monies that should come out at any one time. Mr. Speaker, sir, no more than 1/3. So it means that you can't disadvantage somebody. You got to be able, again, to recognize that we can have particular circumstances, Mr. Speaker, sir, that things will happen. That yes, I owe you because yes, I had an advance, or yes, you took out the money, you overpay me. But as well, recognize the circumstances as well, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, as I close, I want, Mr. Speaker, sir, to recall the Honourable Member for St. Peter when he spoke about an incident in which there was a worker, he held up a newspaper article, was paid in coins by her employer. And I remember that incident very, very clearly. The literature, the academic literature, Mr. Speaker, sir, shows that workplaces that respect workers' rights, that work in tandem with trade unions, that follow good industrial practices, are workplaces as well that prosper. That is not me standing here. That is literature in social sciences, research that has been done. And we have to be able, Mr. Speaker, sir, to ensure that workplaces in this year of our Lord recognize that they need not continue to believe that the exploitation of workers, the denial of rights, and poor working conditions is the only way that their business will profit. That profit comes also as well from ensuring that workers believe fundamentally in their workplaces, that they believe that they are treated right. Within the agricultural sector, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are models that exist. It is not widespread. I came across a farmer, Mr. Speaker, sir, who said to me, he set himself a target of what he wanted to increase his yields from the particular crop that he was growing by for a particular period. And he went to his workers and he said, listen, this is what I want to do. I got two choices. I can either hire more workers to help, or you guys can put in some extra work, but when I make that profit, you will get a share. You know what, Mr. Speaker, sir? The workers said, no, don't hire anymore. We will put in the effort. Mr. Speaker, sir, that farmer surpassed the target that he had set and now has a model that not at the end of a year, but every 3 months, Mr. Speaker, sir, the workers on his farm, true story, are able to get a top-up on their monies because he is profit sharing with his farmers, Mr. Speaker, sir. There are models out there, and this is a successful farmer. This is a large farmer, Mr. Speaker, sir. There are models out there that exist that show that businesses can prosper if they engage their workers, if they share the wealth. The workers will then put in the extra, Mr. Speaker, sir. They will put in the extra and do the work. I know workers, Mr. Speaker, sir, who you could call them at 12, turn up on a weekend, that show commitment, but that is because they are treated correctly, properly by their employer. Mr. Speaker, sir, I commend this bill. Again, I commend the Honourable Minister. I am obliged, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Honourable Representative West.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to lend my support to this protection of wages bill. You know, government through our public service is the employer of approximately 20,000 plus persons. We are the single largest employer in this country. And it is important and fitting, therefore, sir, that this protection of wages bill is not only applicable to the private sector, but it is applicable to the public sector as well. As I believe, sir, that government must be held to the same high standard, definitely no less, than that of the private sector and other sectors in this country. And it is with the significant attempt to secure workers' dignity by ensuring fair pay, by preventing illegal deductions, by adapting payment options to more modern digital transactions, and by uplifting other labor-related standards. It is for all of these things that this bill brings to this chamber and to this country that I am supportive of it. Fair and timely pay is one of the rights that this bill upholds. You would have heard the Honourable Member from Christchurch South speak of situations where there have been overdrawn salaries. Sir, I want to speak to that very briefly, because I think that it is important that those who have responsibility for ensuring that people are paid fairly in a timely manner, that this is done. And sir, I am going to tell you that the public sector has not always been very good at doing this. We are seeking now in the Ministry of the Public Service and Talent Development to find a way to address it. What will often happen, sir, is that you will find persons who they say you're in the system, that your salaries are coming on time. However, others who are there in a temporary capacity or who have been given some temporary assignment, they have to wait on, there's a word that is very popularly used. It's called the authority. Meaning that without the proper authority to pay, the accountant cannot do what is necessary to facilitate that payment. Sir, that is something that we have to tackle head on. Oftentimes what has happened, sir, is that an officer is temporarily assigned, and what is to happen is that at the end of, say, July, that is when the authority to pay them, for them to be in that position, has been given. But guess what? The ministry responsible for that particular individual has not indicated yet to the Ministry of the Public Service that, you know what, this period of action is coming to an end, but we want to extend it. Now, we are now 2 weeks before the end of July. This thing is to expire at the end of July. And the Ministry of the Public Service will say to the ministry, but you know, you need to tell us, one, you want this person to stay, And two, how has this person performed? Which means there's usually some type of assessment that comes with it. Sir, oftentimes neither one will come in a timely manner that will allow the ministry to act. And in some cases, sir, for full transparency, sometimes that request comes on time, but the bureaucracy within the ministry then prevents it from being processed. Those are real bugbearers. And just last Friday, as we had our senior management meeting, sir, we had this conversation about this protection of wages bill is no joke. And I think it is important for every public servant to read this bill and to know their rights. And it is important for us within the system to make sure that we are putting in place those things that are necessary to ensure that people are paid the right amount of money on time for the services that they have given. Overdrawn salaries. How many people know that not more than 1/3 of their salary should be taken out? And I think, again, that is about people knowing their rights, people knowing what is necessary. Oftentimes, we sit back and we wait for others to tell us. And that means that the Ministry of the Public Service has to do a very important job of educating public servants about what their responsibilities are, as well as what their rights are as it relates to the protection of pay. Sir, beyond protecting wages, we must all accept the evolution of jobs. Because the protection of wages are one thing, responsibility for us to ensure that people are able to work and receive pay in a manner that ensures their security, their dignity, their predictability. But sir, we also have to understand that people have a responsibility to grow their own capacity that will not only protect their wages now, but also protect their earning power going forward and be able to augment that as well. In the public service, sir, we have many capable officers who are committed and who demonstrate a commendable work ethic in getting the job done well. Many have also been recognized for their service. If we are to be truthful, sir, there are many others who do not demonstrate the same type of work ethic and who do not necessarily produce at the same levels. It is important, sir, that we have that very careful and uncomfortable conversation many people don't want to have about productivity, not only in the public service, but in the private sector as well. Productivity has to be something that we come out and talk about and also put things in place to ensure that we do better. And improving productivity in our public service is going to require a very frank assessment of our current shortcomings, the immediate modernization through the digital tools that are available, and strict individual and collective accountability. To achieve all of this, sir, we in the public service will have to embrace performance management. We will have to dismantle some of the bureaucracy and the silos that exist within government, and we have to refocus entirely on citizen delivery. You heard other colleagues speak about seeing people. Well, if we focus on delivering to the people and for the people, that will take us a further distance. We have to honor the labor of our people, Mr. Speaker. You know, the economists will tell us that labor is one of the factors of production, the essential things, the inputs that create the goods and services that make an economy work. Such factors as include capital, all the physical assets, the land, including our natural resources, and labor, the mental and the physical effort of the people. And of late, the literature has been to add in entrepreneurship to those sets, to that set of factors of production. Sir, labor is fundamentally different from capital and land. Land does not have a family to feed. Capital does not dream dreams for their children, sir. And that is why it is important that we singularly take labor out as a government and ensure that we are putting in place not just the legislation, but the systems and creating the culture within both the public and private sector for people to be productive and to truly earn what they're being paid. Our workers, sir, for the most part, through their sweat and their honest effort, they deserve to be compensated at the level that they are. From a human resource perspective, timely and predictable payment of wages, it is a fundamental aspect of fair employee practices. And we need to give people, I reinforce that we need to give people the confidence that they will receive payment for their work performed. Sir, beyond the immediacy of protecting today's wages, we must help people, as I said earlier, protect our earning power, their earning power. Because industries are transforming, jobs are evolving, technologies are shifting, and old tasks are giving way to new demands. And sir, this government has done significant work to put in place opportunities for persons to upskill and reskill, for persons to be able to gain access to newer technologies and to actually be able to get in there and use them in a way that will be meaningful to their ability to protect their earning power going forward. You know, many people at this time are afraid of artificial intelligence, AI. And as I've said to people, there are a number of people who say, but you know, I'm afraid that this AI can start to replace us. And I'm saying you're not likely to be replaced by AI. You will probably more likely be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI. And therefore, it is within our capacity to learn and to take responsibility for our learning in order to move forward. A number of persons who have been in the workforce for many years have never, some of them have not in the last 20, 30 years taken one single course to improve, to take responsibility. If government does not send them on the course, not enough people are choosing to do that. But then there are many people who are, and we commend those. And we must continue to commend those who are earning additional credentials, but especially also those who are learning specific skills that are applicable in the workplace immediately. Some of the conversations we have had in our Ministry of the Public Service, and in fact there's a policy that we need to be able to move, and we have put certain things in place to ensure that that is coming sooner rather than later. It is the fact that the public service has not, even despite Barbados making the investment in the National Transformational Initiative, NTI, and the significant certification that comes from that from major universities around the world, where many of those courses are competency-based. So it is not just about the theory. It is about your having a particular competence to do things, where you don't get to Section 2 until you have completed Section 1. and you can't get to section 3 until you've completed section 2. So that by the end of that course, when you get that certification, sometimes from Cornell, sometimes from Stanford, sometimes from Harvard, sometimes from major universities around the world, that by the time you get to the end of that course, you have demonstrated competence with a specific skill. And while those may be short courses, where you are getting micro-credentials, they are oftentimes more significant and useful in the workplace than a 20-year degree. And it is important that we have that balance between the degrees as well as those short skills-based micro-credentialing courses. And I share that, sir, because I don't know how many of you know that Coursera, which happens to be the major platform that we use, that Coursera and Udemy, for those of you who are not yet familiar, tends to be more applied, more practical. The two are now one and are being offered to us so that you get that balance of both the theoretical side and the applied and the practical side, developing both your knowledge and as well as your skill in doing a number of things. Sir, the public sector is still telling people, and we had to deal with that last week, that no matter how many of these courses you take, it will not go towards your promotion or towards your advancement in the public service. That has to stop, sir. And already there are discussions with NTI and its partners and with the Ministry of the Public Service to ensure that we put a framework in place that singularly represents those digital skills, those micro-credentials, those competency-based skills and learning. All of this, sir, is part of not just protecting your wages today, but making sure that your earning power continues in the years to come. Sir, there's a reality check that we have to have. Recognizing, as it relates to some of the issues raised earlier by our colleagues, that slow approvals and a backlog will choke off national progress. Fundamentally, it impacts individuals in their pockets, in their homes, in their families. It also has the ability to choke off national progress. We are clinging to paper processes, sir, that is wasting valuable time of our team. We also have vague performance metrics. And while the public service has done considerable and commendable work in improving the mechanisms for the performance and development review, what has happened is its implementation at the level of the supervisors, the heads of departments, permanent secretaries. That is something where we need to give some support, because it's one thing to have a mechanism, but it is another thing to actually use it effectively in a way that allows us to focus on development. There has been a culture that performance reviews have been used as punitive for punishment. We need to shift that to a place where it's developmental. By doing this performance review, Mr. Speaker, I now know where we can support you, if it were you, but it would never be, sir. Where we would support that individual, that officer, in doing better. Identify specifically what their needs are and take a developmental approach to helping them improve performance rather than one that tends to be more punitive and used to pick at what is wrong rather than help them to use their strengths, number one, where it's a strengths-based approach, but secondly, to be able to help them move forward. Sir, the path to transformation has to be one that measures real outcomes, that will tie career advancement to actual completed work rather than not only tenure. So yes, tenure has to be a part of it, but we also have to tie that to actual work that is done. That road, sir, to transformation must replace the manual bottlenecks with automated and digital tracking systems that allow us to do what we need to do in a timely manner. I will not speak about it today. I will speak about the Human Resource Management Information System at a different time, which is a system that will allow us to digitalize the processes, the human resources processes, and bring efficiency and improvement. It has been long in coming, and we are continuing to work on that. I will not speak to it now. I want to wait until we know for sure when it is delivered, to speak in a more substantive manner on it. We need, sir, and this is certainly an important point, to reward our dedicated officers while we are actively retraining and reassigning those who are not performing at the level we would like. We have often not done the best job at rewarding our dedicated officers, and that is something that I would want to see encouraged and that we're working to encourage. Sir, as I conclude, I want to say that this protection of wages bill is just one of the duties of government. But beyond the protection of today's wages, we must also look at the protection of the earning power of both the individual and the country in the years ahead. And that will require us as individuals taking responsibility, government continuing to create the environment for the best practices as it relates to labor, and it will also take us being serious about changing the culture and having conversations around productivity that will ensure that all of this legislation that's put in place goes to the benefit of both the individual and the country. With that, I want to commend the Honourable Member from St. Peter for the work that he and his ministry have been doing in terms of advancing legislation and regulations that will continue to improve the environment for labour. And I want to say today, I am proud and pleased to add my voice of support to the Protection of Wages Bill.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to, first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to first of all say how proud I am to be leading a government that continues to recognize that there is a fundamental importance in how we seek to treat workers in this country, and to do so against the backdrop that one of the very first bills passed by a Barbados Labour Party government in the post-universal adult franchise era was the Protection of Wages Bill. And that what we come here to do today is to modernize it in key aspects, given the passage of time and the development of different practices and technology since the early 1950s, when Sir Grantley Adams made it his business and the Barbados Labour Party made it their business to put this, along with holidays with pay and other pieces of labour legislation, at the foundation of how they sought to transform this nation. And so today, sir, we speak conscious that this bill says something very simple. Once a worker has done the work, the employer must pay money on time. The employer must not take money from their pay packet without proper authority. It recognizes the imbalance between the relationship between employer and employee and seeks to level that playing field such that advantage, a good old Bajan word, advantage is not taken of the workers. And that if it is, that the employer must face real consequences when the law is broken. Sir, this is critical. And this bill helps to make sure that the worker actually receives and keeps what they earn. A wage packet, Mr. Speaker, is not an accounting entry. It is rent. It is bus fare. It is school lunch. It is those things that allow people to keep their body and their dignity safe. It is the electricity bill, the same one, by the way, that we remove VAT on, reduce VAT on, since 2022. Since 2022, in a way that the British government has done this morning under the new Prime Minister as a hallmark of their cost of living government that they have heralded today. And we were doing that for the people of this country since 2022. Along with other measures, of course. But I make the point that it's not a wage packet, is not an accounting entry. This is what helps people buy food on the table for the family, or may have to go for prescriptions when they come from the doctor. We may not be able to tell the shipping lane what price to charge Barbados, or to control every global shock, as we've said over and over. But we can decide that the money already earned by a Bajan worker must arrive on time, must be backed by a remedy with teeth. And the national minimum wage that we have sets the least that a worker must earn. And that we did as a government in circumstances where for decades Barbadians were told, Barbados governments were told, that the introduction of a minimum wage would lead to the collapse of this economy and to the collapse of microeconomy, especially with small shops and middle-sized shops in this country. But we were able to do it. In the same way, sir, this bill continues, and I say continues because the fundamental protection was put in place by the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams in the early 1950s, as I said. But today, we continue to place a shield around what the worker has already earned. And I ask us, sir, to begin to think in clear terms on a number of matters which I intend to address today. One, that payday becomes a legal obligation. Two, that the wage packet belongs to the worker, not nobody else. Three, that modern payment must not just become modern coercion. Four, that leaving a job or seeing a business fail does not erase the right to earned pay. 5, that a right must always be paired with a road to a remedy. 6, that the law acquires consequences worthy of the offense, and certainly the consequences that are in the existing legislation from the 1950s do not act as that deterrent. And 7, that this bill is part of a wider program for working people in this country. And let me address the first matter, sir. That payday comes as a legal obligation. In clause 3 of this bill, sir, it is said that the employer must establish a recurring pay period and a recurring pay day. That certainty is critical for employees to plan out their lives. Wages earned for that period must be paid no later than the payday. And Mr. Speaker, a person, therefore, if they are paid by the hour, day, or week, must be paid weekly. And a person who is on a fortnightly rate must be paid at least every fortnight. A person on a monthly or longer rate must be paid at least monthly. And I'm breaking this down today in these terms because I want every worker, from the fields to the factories, from the hotels to the homes, to understand what is at stake and what is being reinforced and protected by this bill. It is no accident, sir, that this bill did not pass this House with one day of debate, because this government determined that it is important for us to use this exercise not only to pass legislation, but to be a form of public education, so that those who may be being exploited but who are listening to the radio now can hear what are their rights going forward. Now, the bill does not say that every worker must be paid weekly. At the general minimum wage, we already know that with the minimum wage at $10.71, that 40 hours of work works out to $428.40 before deductions. I want to repeat it. If you are a minimum wage earner working a 40-hour week, you should be earning $428.40 per week before a cent is deducted from you in any respect. That money is earned. And you, I'm sure, would have committed as the worker that money, as I said, to a rent or mortgage, to transport, to food, to school expenses, especially as we are in the season of back to school. And the worker should not have to lend it back to any business by waiting beyond payday. In the event that those things happen, it really has to be as a result of some catastrophe or emergency, but cannot be part of the practical, every day, every week, every month reality of our workers. As I keep saying, we can't tell the people overseas what to charge us. We can't tell the people overseas what price to set. We can't tell every employer covered by this bill that a worker's pay is not to be held hostage. But if we can't tell every employer, we can pass the law that ensures that every employer knows, don't turn a brush, do not touch it. It does not belong to you. The wage packet, sir, belongs to the worker. And clauses 7 to 14, as the minister has brought in this bill, puts rules around advances, around deductions, and around the recovery of overpayments. I believe that the minister in his wrap-up will also clarify what deductions can be made legitimately, particularly in the aid and benefit of the employee, of the worker, such that they are equally not constrained by a literal interpretation of the provisions of the bill that would prevent them, for example, from benefiting from a mortgage at a reduced interest rate if they happen to work for a bank. So we do not intend to confuse the arrangements for people like that. But the narrow purpose of this bill addresses that deductions require the worker's written consent. Deductions require the worker's written consent. And an employer, sir, cannot and will not be allowed under this bill to charge interest on any advance that they make on wages. So a man can't say, I am going to give you $1,000, but you must pay me back at 10%. That's now prohibited. That's prohibited. And it is a criminal offense. And as I said, that is why I am breaking down these things, because this today must allow ordinary workers to know that the people who they elected in this country have come in here to protect their interests where their interests matter most, their ability to earn and to protect themselves. Employer fines and deductions for bad or negligent work are generally prohibited and are subject to the limited treatment of property damage in the bill. And I would want to suggest that if you are in doubt, ask your union or ask the Labor Department to confirm for you. Because sometimes there's a little gray area, and we need to make sure that you know that in addition to what the bill says, you have a Labor Department or you have the unions to which you belong who can help you bring clarity to this in your head. Where notice is required for another permitted deduction, the worker has to be told the reason. And I'm not going to get in today to events of recent weeks, that have clearly shown that people have been forced to accept deductions in circumstances where effectively there is no one excluded from them. So that even if the employer says that I really intended for you to decide on your own and you sign on your own, the truth is that if that is the condition of work of everybody, the power to negotiate or the power to say no is completely impaired. And that is what constitutes abuse in the eyes of the law. That is defined in certain pieces of legislation as exploitation. I will not go into those details today, but suffice it to say that you cannot tell me that I have agreed to something when you have a gun to my head. In no circumstances. So this bill places also, sir, a limit of 1/3 with respect to the advances or the types of deductions or the overpayment recovery. Sometimes a worker is overpaid, but an employer cannot come and take back all the money that he overpaid you just so. Because at the end of the day, you still have to live. And if you can't live, Grantley Adams and them understood it then in the 1950s, and we reinforce it today. If you cannot live, you cannot protect your family, you cannot do the things that make you enjoy the dignity of being a human being. And that will happen if you try to recover all the money that you overpay me, not because of my fault, because of your negligence. And then you want to come and catch-spasm me for the next 2, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. It does not work so. And I want the workers of this country to know that if somebody's doing that to them, then they need to go to their union or to the labor office. The limits, as I said, are a little ticklish when it comes to deductions for mortgages and that kind of thing, and we will make it clear that that is not going to be impaired or affected by reason of the passage of this bill, and that there will be no criminal act in those circumstances. So this bill protects fundamentally the workers' choices. With respect to written consent, a worker can assign a part of their wage or mortgage or another household obligation, and they ask the employer, please can you take it out for me so I don't have to catch a bus to go to town and to go and put the money in the bank or to the credit union or to go and pay Light and Power or to go and do X, Y, Z. Because in this kind of relationship, in a digital world, it may be possible for you to do things for me that will also give the people who may be lending me money greater comfort that I'm going to pay, because I've agreed that the money is not even coming into my hands, the money is going to go directly to you. Sir, the claim, therefore, about how we treat to workers in this respect has to be understood that it is not an act of zealotry, it is an act of fairness, recognizing the disparity in power between the employer and the employee. Where a worker sees a deduction marked retention, the label itself does not make that lawful. The risk of running the business belongs to who? The owner of the business. It cannot be passed on to the worker's pay packet. I want to repeat that. The risk of running a business belongs to the employer, to the owner. And this everyday principle is clear. An everyday principle that says that the employer cannot be the accuser, the judge, and the debt collector. Well, we don't live in a star chamber. We recognize the principles of natural justice. And therefore, it is impossible for an employer to be that accuser, judge, and debt collector, and then quietly settle the dispute by emptying out the worker's wage packet. Well, that can't work. So that, believe you me, when a $20 disappears from a pay packet without explanation, somebody might want to say that that's a small thing, man. That's an administrative matter. But to the parent who has to count bus fares, For the parent who has to make sure that they leave some food for the children at home on summer vacation. That is not a small thing. That's the difference between them being able to eat lunch for 2 or 3 days with respect to the sandwiches that can get made for the children. And I want us, that is why this government keeps saying we must see people, we must hear people, and we must feel people. And there are too many people in this country who do not, at the same time, take and have consideration for others. And that is why the golden rule taught to us in Sunday school and primary school is so important. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Mr. Speaker, sir, the third point I made in here today is that modern payment must not become coercion. Clauses 3 to 5 recognize that modern forms of payment exist. And where payment is made into a deposit account, the bill says specifically that the employee shall determine the financial institution that they want to have that money going to. The employer chooses what they want as a lawful payment method, and that's fair. But the employee must choose the financial institution when a deposit account is used. Sir, I want members in here to recognize that this bill answers also a real indignity. A petrol station worker in St. Michael receiving $249 in final pay, entirely in coins. You understand what I just tell you? Entirely in coins. That is a wicked act. Multiply 249 by 4 25-cent pieces. That is 4 short of 1,000 coins. You understand what I'm just telling you, sir? Oh man. Clause 3 limits the amount of the cash wage that a person receives that can be paid in coins. Not because the Chief Parliamentary Counsel or the Minister trying to be petty, but because realistically, imagine walking around with 996 coins in your hand. First of all, you're alerting to everybody, come, look here, I got money, take me. So that this bill meets people exactly where people need to be met, and not just with lofty provisions that speak in philosophical terms. And that is why I've determined in this debate, sir, to give the kind of speech that I'm giving. Where another payment method is used, the worker must be given a reasonable time during normal business hours to convert the payment to cash in a financial institution. Now we hope that there will be a greater uptake on digital payments, and that is why we launched BIMPay. But we recognize that this is not a country where you mandate people's compliance with the digital world. And there are some people who will, whatever you do, they say I only dealing with cash. Whatever you do, I dealing with checkbooks. I can't handle that thing yet. But there are a lot of people who recognize that by going with digital payments, I save myself a bus fare to town, or I save myself gasoline to town, and it gives me the convenience to be able to do in seconds what I would otherwise do in hours. And there's nothing wrong with that, but this country must never be the country that says, and that is why the Minister of Finance knows my view, and the Minister of Labour, I suspect, who is responsible for the National Insurance Social Security Scheme, that as long as there are people who want to still receive a check, this government under my leadership will still give them a check. Because that is the reality of giving people the benefit of meeting them where their comfort levels are. So, sir, I want to say, therefore, that an employer cannot dictate where, how, or with whom the worker spends his wages. An agreed benefit in kind may add to money wages, but it cannot replace money wages. If I want to give you something else, that's cool, you know. Because if you sell everything you got to buy everything you need. And sometimes an employer will say, look, you hold on to these extra things I got there. But the fact that I'm giving you extra things cannot be now computed in value and replace what the wages or salaries are supposed to give you. Worker has still to be paid in the language of old, in the coins of the realm, but not the coins adding up to $249 with 996 coins walking about like if it is a heavy weight that you carry in because you exercising. The issue of payroll, larger companies will have a structured payroll system, invariably on software, and that makes it easier for most of them. But sometimes there are glitches, and sometimes there are mistakes. And this is the point I'm making, that because the employee is unequally yoked with the employer, you cannot ask the employee to bear the consequences of the mishap or the negligence of the employer with respect to that. So, technology is there to serve our people, but technology must not be imposed on all people as if it is the dictate of the country that this is the only way they can function with respect to it. I want, sir, to address the next point. Leaving a job or seeing that a business fails in which you are working does not erase the obligation to pay the employees. You know, sir, one of the reasons why in our insolvency legislation there is priority given to workers and to NIS is because we understand the social fabric that will be torn if we don't protect the people, even in the face of closures, in the face of insolvency, and ultimately even in the face of bankruptcy. You may not have enough to settle everything that you owe, but who must you pay first? And this is what a country that has had the scars that we have, and a parliament that set the legislation to describe people for the first time in a slavery system as chattel. This parliament has therefore a duty to make sure that we move as far away from that history as is humanly possible, and recognize that even in the face of closures, that obligation to treat another human being with dignity and to pay them what you owe them is paramount. Clause 18 requires that all wages and other amounts already due at the end of employment to be paid no later than the payday of the next pay period. That would have to be applied if the employment had continued. Sir, if a failed business owed somebody, a worker, $2,000, as I said, and I'm breaking it down now in ordinary language, then that business has to make sure that that worker has priority to receive that $2,000 before the business pays a supplier of goods that would normally be a creditor, that would normally have to be paid. And I'm saying this for the benefit of small employers as well, so that you know that if you're going through a rough time and the money's short, and you've got to decide who you have to pay, don't go break the law and pay the creditor. Pay the worker first. Pay the worker first. Sir, I want to speak about the rights being paid to remedies. These clauses in this bill allow an affected worker to go to the Chief Labor Officer. And I've already said that if you belong to a union, you should go to your union first. Similarly, if the union is your representative, as happens in other cases, they can carry you and walk with you and help you go through any circumstances that need to be gone through so that you can get satisfaction, another old good Bajan word, from the employer with respect to the complaint that you have. I believe, sir, that it is important that we reinforce in people's heads what the new penalties will be, and I'm asking the Minister of Labour to ensure that there are public service announcements, because you cannot assume that because a bill was debated in Parliament 2, 3, 4 days, that fellas in Pike Corner in St. Lucie running a shop, or people in the back of Station Hill running a business, or a fella running a tire shop, that they know exactly what is expected of them. And therefore, a period of public education through you, Mr. Speaker, I'm suggesting to the Minister of Labour that it not only be done for this legislation, but for the other recent pieces of Labour legislation, because it seems that people have to be reminded in this country what the law is. And there are too many people, the large percentage of Barbadians who are engaged either as worker or employer, by far occupies the largest percentage of the population. And to that extent, therefore, sir, it is important to remind them of what the minimum wage obligations are, of how to protect people's pay, of how you deal with holidays with pay, of how you cannot discriminate against persons, of how you need to protect the occupational health and safety. And believe you me, the government is not perfect, but we are modernizing as many aspects of our labor legislation, recognizing that this is the country that has consistently, not in this government's life, but for the last, over 5 decades, has enjoyed high membership and high regard in the International Labour Organization on a tripartite basis, recognizing that we come from a tradition of persons not only in government who have served in labor, but that on its own, labor has been able to also establish itself as a credible voice, not just locally, but internationally in the International Labour Organization. We today have a situation, sir, where 3 members of this country sit on the ILO governing body. And of those 3, 2 are members of this parliamentary party. The Minister of Labour, the Honourable Minister of Labour, who just chaired globally the arrangements for the platform economy, and then the member for St. George North, the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers' Union, continuing as a key member of the workers' group in a way that her predecessors, her distinguished predecessors, Sir Roy Trotman and Sir Frank Walcott, would have done over the last few decades. The third person, of course, is the representative from the Barbados Employers Confederation, who ensures that Barbados truly gives reflection of the social partnership that has existed in this country for over 3 decades. And I want to salute them, but it doesn't end there. As we speak today, Barbados' ambassador at Geneva, the Honourable Matthew Wilson, is the chairman of the executive board of the International Labour Organization for the next year. This small country has therefore continued to provide leadership in critical areas. And I say so because I've repeated the parliament that gave the world the 1661 slave code must always pay forward in a way that brings nothing but complete dignity and fairness to workers, because we regrettably belong to a parliament that distorted humanity by introducing the most oppressive and what the United Nations has now called the gravest crime against humanity, a slavery system that was premised on chattel, on property. Other systems of slavery existed, but what distinguished this one was that it said, you belong to me because you're property, you're chattel. and the Code Noir that France has now repealed less than 3 months ago followed the 1661 slave code in Barbados by 20 years. So this is why we must ensure not just that we increase the penalties, and the penalties go from a low $48 as it was under the old legislation to, I believe, $30,000. Sorry? Yeah, $20,000 and $30,000, so that the penalty is prohibitive but not oppressive. And it is always to get that balance between what can be prohibitive but what does not constitute oppression to the employer at the same time. So the final point is that this bill does not work on its own. I just referred to the other suite of labor legislation that both pre-existed this government, but also the significant amount of work that the Honourable Member for St. Peter has done, and the member for the constituency of St. George North as General Secretary has agitated for and promoted. And as we can see, the private member's resolution that was brought in here only a few months ago, urging this government to put in place a new system where the portability of benefits attaches to the person, and that we can, with the use of technology, be far more creative in ensuring that a person who splits their time up because they do not work for one single employer, but work perhaps for 3 or 4 in a week, and are itinerant in the true sense of the word, but firm and solid by doing those same arrangements for 10 years or 15 years. But because they have worked separately and under 21 hours, cannot claim the benefits that attach themselves to our social security system. That is wrong, and I hope that the Honourable Minister is having the National Insurance and Social Security Scheme do the work that is necessary to make those changes to our benefits, because this is a gaping hole. A lot of people who live in the housing areas, a lot of people who live in my constituency, do not keep down a single solid job that gives them 30 or 40 hours a week. They get 5 hours from somebody here. They go in and press for another lady and get 4 hours. They cook for another person who the parents are at home alone and they're working long hours, and therefore that person goes and cleans and works for them once a week. Those persons must not be left out of our sight or our protection, sir. And to that extent, therefore, I look forward to this being seen as part of a suite of legislation, and for the purposes of memory. Because Owen Arthur always used to tell me that politics is the art of repetition, and that if you don't repeat, people don't remember sometimes. Since 2018, sir, this administration has been built as well on a foundation of not just a philosophy, but a record to protect the workers of this country. I watch with amazement as I see the transitions in the United Kingdom and the things that they are now calling for. And I smile, because I know that as they seek to return to being a Labour Party, we have been a Labour Party, governing as a Labour Party in this nation since 2018. I spoke about the discrimination of workers. The member for St. Peter brought that when we were meeting at the other place in Worthing. Indeed, I suspect we may even have been in COVID when that was introduced. If not just before, just after. Yes, we were in COVID when that was introduced. I speak about the whistleblower protection legislation that was enacted by this government. The Honourable former Attorney General brought that here in 2021. I speak about a number of workplace safety regulations that the member for St. Peter brought in this country in 2022. I speak about labour standards that were attached to qualifying public concessions in 2024 that the member for St. George North agitated and insisted that in the same way Grantley Adams brought consequences for failing to treat workers properly with respect to access to government contracts, that in today's world, with respect to our tourism and hospitality industry and respect to a number of other industries that benefit from tax concessions, $850 million in tax concessions given out every year in this country, that those people who benefit from the diversion of the obligation to pay taxes should not treat workers unfairly, and if they so do, there should be consequences for doing that, because you cannot want to reprobate and approbate at the same time. You cannot believe that it is your duty or right that you could get a benefit from the taxpayers and turn around and pay the taxpayers absolute scant regard with respect to how you treat them but draw their benefits. I speak, sir, of the Family Leave Act, and sorry, before I go from there, the construction rates that need to be specified have to apply with respect to public contracts. I speak, sir, of the family leave that was ushered in and enacted in this country in 2025, extending maternity benefits, and introducing for the first time in the history of this country paternity benefits. I am not going to say that it took a woman leading to be able to make sure that men got fairness with respect to the raising of children in this country. I would never do that, sir. But I cannot ignore the fact that it has happened. Sir, so when I say to you that we have not just come here to introduce this bill alone, that this is part of a proud record. And sometimes we need to remind people of how we have transformed their lives and protected them from a vulnerability that might otherwise be their lot. The Barbados Job Register, introduced and announced by the member for St. Peter and the member for Christchurch East as former Minister of Home Affairs in July of last year, recognizing that people were seeking to take advantage of the fact that there may be shortages, but recognizing that even if there are shortages, you have to sweep every corner clean. There are still people who out there that you may not have seen and you have not given enough notice to know that these were the skills that you wanted. And they're simply putting an ad in a newspaper on page 3 or page 5 when the majority of people not necessarily buying the newspapers can communicate the message in 2026 that this is what you need. And the government took the decision, introduced the jobs register, sir, let there be a market, recognizing that I as an employee have these skills and I am looking for a job in these areas. And I as an employer have these needs and I am looking for those jobs. And Mr. Speaker, I hope that we can continue to refine the concept of that Barbados Job Register and make sure that it can help us sweep corners clean rather than people making crass and rough assumptions about the nature of the job market in this country. We know we have a skills deficit in certain areas, but we don't have it in all areas. And let us not fool ourselves that we have it in all areas. Sir, this is also the government that introduced the National Workplace Wellness Policy, placing worker well-being on the national agenda. And we know that that cannot mandate in each instance how a worker is treated, but we must set the standards and we must seek to enforce those standards and encourage compliance with those standards, because at the end of the day, and I've said this in particular in the context of Tourism 3.0, the tourism workers of this country save the hoteliers of this country, and by virtue of that, the economy of this country when it was on its knees in the middle of COVID. Make no mistake about it. And it is of significance that at the same time that was happening and the anti-tourism sentiment was rising because of the notion that it was the tourism sector that was bringing in an increased exposure to the public health risk of COVID, it means that we've had to step back and begin, and not just Barbados, because the exodus from the hospitality industry globally has been significant as a result of the pandemic. Now, Barbados does not have that luxury. I said it last week when we opened Royalton Vessels. Almost $1 in every $2 of economic activity in this country is currently linked to tourism. Do we want to reduce that reliance? Of course we do. That is why the member for St. James Central has been given the responsibility as Senior Minister for the Productive Sectors to ensure that the Minister of Agriculture, the member for Christchurch South, and the senator from the other place, who is Minister of Industry, and he himself as Minister of Commerce, can work along with the Minister of Tourism to create other synergies that become the platform, the foundation upon which increased growth and inclusive growth can take place in those sectors that do not now command the same level of economic activity as they should be. That is why the Deputy Prime Minister is going to have to take responsibility for taking a fishing industry that has been predominantly artisanal, with the exception of the export of tuna to North America, grade A tuna, but to see how best can we continue to capture the market in the fishing sector and industry, not just in North America, but recognizing that Africa only imports 1.5% of its fishing needs from the Caribbean, and yet we are only 5-6 hours away on flight from Africa for a perishable commodity. We have not even begun to touch the surface. But in the interim, tourism is responsible for almost $1 in every $2 of economic activity. And if we are going to be serious about it, I believe that we have to come to the realization, not just in tourism, but in almost all businesses where service in particular is at the core, that it is the attitude not of the employer, but of the worker that determines whether more business comes back or business leaves you. Because if that employee does not treat that customer appropriately or with a sense of decorum or with a sense of joy and pleasure, it doesn't just simply affect gratuities and tips, it affects future business. And if we begin to understand that, then we begin to understand that you cannot have 60, 70, 80 men living in an area of temporary ramshackle accommodation with no provision to clean for them, no provision to cook for them, and making them work beyond the 40 hours of a week that the majority of us would normally work without requisite compensation for overtime. Sir, especially if the people are working in the construction industry, in fact, in most sectors, because in the construction industry, if you paid 2 maids, 2 cleaners, $700 a week, and that's almost double the minimum wage, and then you pay a chef, a cook, $1,000 a week, count that for me, no? That's $2,400 a week. $2,400 a week to separate you from the public condemnation that would otherwise come your way, because men who are working 50 and 60 hours a week ain't coming home to do what? To clean and cook. Those are the realities, and if you just pause to recognize that those same workers, if treated properly, if fed properly, will give you a level of productivity in most instances that will make the difference between how competitive your business is or not. And that we have to move away from this thing of believing that companies can only make egregious profits, excess profits, large profits on the backs of human beings. Sir, fast money that is not sustainable is not successful business. And if you try to squeeze out every dollar for your pocket as owner, day does run till night catch it. If you try to do it, at some point, those workers, especially in a country that knows what it is to cut the ice, what Bajans call it? Malicious compliance. When you live in a small space, people had to learn to survive for 3-4 centuries. And they know how to smile in your face.
Stab in your back.
I ain't saying stab you in your back, but they know to smile in your face and just do as they like when they're ready. Do as they like when they're ready. And you wondering why you can't get progress on A, B, C, D, E, but you ain't study that you are the reason, because just simply how you have treated people. And I keep making the point that in this country, the greatest increase in productivity will come not by us having to treat it in quantitative terms and measure out this and measure out this. The greatest increase in productivity will come by changing how we treat people. In this country, the 3 most powerful words I have maintained for my entire life, and especially public career, is we is we. We is we. In all of its imperfect grammar, we is we dominates. When a Bajan tell you, man, don't mind, we is we. Mr. Speaker, what is do? Whatever they're telling you, that I dare with you, that I gain the distance with you, that I got your back. When a Bajan tells you that, it means that if you had to go along and somebody in your family dropped down and you in the middle of doing something on the front line as a manager or as an owner, the body who helping you all the time will step up to the plate and tell skip it along. We don't mind that. When you come back and say, how much you got for it? You say, but we man, you don't be buying drinks for me all the time. You don't be helping me out all the time. You don't be dropping me home all the time. The extra things. And this is the kind of conversation I want to have with this country, as much as I also want to have a conversation with those who believe that they must thief. Because you cannot thief what don't, you can't take what don't belong to you. And this notion, somebody coming home from tipsy Sunday night, visitors to the country, and 2 people go and thief and carry away from them. That is not the Barbados that we can be encouraging or building. And I'm going to speak plainly, because too many things that are affecting us as a nation are not coming from systemic or institutional realities. They're coming from personal choices. They're coming from people forgetting what they were taught in Sunday school or what they were taught in primary school. And if they didn't go to Sunday school or primary school, at some point in their life, I tell you, somebody has told them that thieving wrong. And whether the thieving coming from an individual, an employee, or an employer, in every instance, it is wrong. And there must be zero tolerance for it in this country. So let me go back, sir, as I close. I wanted the opportunity to speak in this debate today. I wanted to speak exactly how I have spoken. I didn't speak for the members of this parliament today. I spoke for and to the workers of this country. I spoke to them, sir, because they must understand that we have their back. And not only have their back, but we are prepared to create a Barbados that is fair. On the night, I could really say on the morning, the early morning of the 12th of February, when every person effectively in this chamber was standing next to me on a very, very small platform, I committed to this country, as I did on the swearing-in of the cabinet, that this term must allow us to do 3 things. 1, stop poor people from being poor. 2, fight injustice, and that is what this bill fundamentally is about today. And 3, create opportunities for people, particularly in the area of intergenerational wealth, because cash is not wealth. Last night, we spent time with the good people of St. Philip in Ideas Forum. And I continue to thank my colleagues in this chamber for taking the time after a long day at work and coming out once a month for 11 months a year and listen to the people with whom we have entered a solemn contract, a covenant, in fact, as we said on the last occasion. They're the ones who will continue to push us. They're the ones who will remind us of things. But they're also the ones who will give us ideas that we did not come up with ourselves. And if we were not meeting with them, we would not have the benefit of it. It used to be a time when the call-in programs did that. But I seem to feel that more often than not, it is going down a different road, and I leave them to determine whether they too can join the government in becoming an ideas forum at least one day a week, every week. And if they can so do, then I think they will add tremendous value to the fact that this country always wants to be an empowering and an enabling country rather than one that is satisfied in wallowing in our own dismay and pitying ourselves. Sir, I've said it over and over, nobody owes us a living. Nobody owes us a living. And the truth is that the quicker we realize that, the quicker we will get up and do what we have to do. I want to just use the opportunity, sir, before I close, to simply reinforce that we came from a set of events that we will commemorate by next Sunday, or next Sunday. And I want to remind even the members of Parliament in here that if ever there is a date that members of Parliament ought to turn up and revere, it is July 26. And July 26 laid bare in a revolution, in an uprising in this country, the awful conditions under which our grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents were enduring. And out of that, within less than a year, came a couple hundred yards away from the scene of Golden Square, the establishment of the Barbados Progressive League, which became the Barbados Labour Party. At the same time, 3 years later, that political party, the Barbados Labour Party, made it its business to not just want to have political representation of people's rights, but also industrial and labor representation, and hence the establishment of the Barbados Workers' Union in 1941, 85 years ago this year. Sir, I remind us of these things because there are still people, regrettably, who have not yet understood what has made us great as a nation, and what has made us powerful as a people, and what has taken generations of Bajans out of poverty and the worst circumstances. Can we say that everyone has made that journey? No, we cannot. Can we say that the majority have made that journey? Yes, we can. But can we now commit to ensuring that as long as this Barbados Labour Party is in government, that its first obligation will be to keep faith with the purpose for which we were formed in 1938, to take the laboring class and to give them opportunities and treatment that they had not been afforded in 300 years in this country. Have we been able to do that for a century yet? No. And that is why the journey is still so important. Because the majority of time as we move in to commemorate next year 400 years of modern settlement in this country, and the year after 400 years of the settlement of this city of Bridgetown, in which we find ourselves, our capital city. And in 2030, 400 years of the settlement of Speightstown. We are in reflective mode for the next few years. And we have to remember, therefore, those things for which we must forever fight, and those things to which we must never return. And that is why, without getting into the details of events of recent weeks, this government is resolute that people who believe that excess profits are to come on the backs of people of this country. And I go further, as I said at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting, or those people who believe that excessive markups must be imposed on ordinary people because they can, will soon find out that they will be held accountable in every respect. The Minister of Energy and Commerce has a duty to bring regulations in here to allow him to get real-time access to prices in this country so that people can make sensible decisions. And I thank him for the launch of the Ask Delia app in its much improved and much expanded format that came last week. But it will continue to be constrained in the quality of its information unless he can get access to real-time data such that Bajans can make informed decisions. That's on the commerce side of equations. On the labor side of equations, we do not only come to protect Bajans, we come to protect human beings, irrespective of where you are born. As long as you are a human being, this government will see you and protect you. And I say simply also that a lot of the regulations and a lot of what we have in this country cannot be treated in silos, but must be treated in a holistic and a coherent manner. Because people don't come to work in silos. People don't come to work to deal with labor legislation here and environmental health legislation there and occupational health legislation there and trafficking legislation there. People come to work to ensure that the environment within which they are working is fit for purpose and befitting of the dignity that is necessary for a human being. I say those words because it is my duty as Prime Minister to set the tone which will be allowed in this country and which will equally be taken from our landscape through the provision not just of laws, but more importantly, the enforcement of laws. The member for St. James South once entered political folklore in this country by talking about the Kadir mentality. St. James Central, sorry, not St. James South. A Kadir mentality cannot be allowed to substitute itself for appropriate, effective, and clear enforcement. Compassion is always available in the courts. Mercy is always available in the courts. Mr. Speaker, mitigation is always available to the courts. But people forget that L comes before M. Liability comes before mitigation. And sometimes, regrettably, people do not know that they are doing wrong until they're caught, because they do not want their morality to guide them, but want instead to be guided by public perception and public treatment. Well, if you are guided by your own morality, you know when you're doing wrong. You know when you're thieving. You know when you're doing things that you should not do. But if you cannot be honest enough with yourself to remind yourself of your own infelicities, then that is why the public space exists. And I end with this simple recognition. The thing that distinguishes countries like ours from other countries that believe that the market must always dominate, that the private sector must always be right, that Chicago school mentality that so dominated the Washington consensus in the post-1980s environment, that says that let the individual players who have capacity do what they can. And that is why the world is facing what it is facing geopolitically today, because we have endured 4 to 5 decades of growing inequality, where people have treated others like the scum of the earth, do not see them, do not feel them, do not hear them. And we're about to see the advent of the era of trillionaires, not even billionaires. Trillionaires sounded like a word that we didn't even know how to pronounce as children. It sounded like a make-up word.
A gazillion.
Like gazillion, exactly. But today, we are now about to see a handful of people contemplate how they can play and go to Mars at the same time that 600 million people in Africa can't get electricity. That people in Haiti continue to fight to get stability and security. That people all about the world in Cuba fighting to provide themselves with electricity. This world has to be a fair world. But we cannot only speak of the world being fair without speaking of our home and our community and our country being fair. We cannot guarantee what the rest of the world can do, but we can always guarantee what we can and will do. And I say to you, Mr. Speaker, today, that in the same way that Mahatma Gandhi told us that the change begins with us, this Barbados Labour Party government continues to work and move in a direction that will uplift the workers of this country, that will seek to stop poor people from being poor, that will fight injustice, and that will work our live-a-gall out to give people opportunities so that they can become the best that they can be, and that they can build the wealth that is necessary to stabilize their family. We have not reached where we want to reach, but we are marching on to Zion with a pep in our step and with a focus that is unshakable in spite of all of the challenges that we face. I want, sir, to commend this Minister of Labour yet again for rising to the occasion and ensuring that this administration, which I have the honor to lead, continues to keep faith with ordinary Bajans. And I want to salute also the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers' Union for continuing to be the conscience and the driver of doing better and bigger things for the laboring classes of this country, who for the majority of this country's settlement were denied it, deprived of it, and not know what it is to be proud Bajans. We hope to build a complete generation of proud Bajans, and this is just a small little contribution to making sure that that can happen. Small in the number of pages, small in its importance to some people, but large in its benefits to thousands, tens of thousands of Bajan workers, meeting them where they are in their everyday reality in working to support their families in this country. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you. Thank you.
Honourable Representative James South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am very pleased to have the opportunity to rise to support the Protection of Wages Bill 2026. Indeed, my colleagues have spoken with passion. They have spoken in detailed ways about the tremendous work that this particular administration has done for the benefit of workers. And so I want to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for St. Peter and the Honourable Member for St. George North for the collaboration that has led to the development of the Protection of Wages Bill for the ordinary people of Barbados. By bringing this bill, we are emphasizing a very important principle, that a wage is more than a payment for work performed. A wage represents dignity, it represents security, it represents hope for the worker and their families. And especially for vulnerable workers, it is the difference between stability and uncertainty, between progress and poverty. This bill is significant because it modernizes and strengthens the protection of workers' earnings. It safeguards their right to receive their wages properly, to receive them on time and without unlawful deductions. It recognizes modern methods of payment, protection of employees from unfair practices, and it strengthens penalties for abuse. I think the one that excites me even more is where the workers' wages are protected when a company becomes insolvent. Throughout the history of this country, we've seen time and time again when there has been insolvency that workers are left holding the bag, standing at the door, came to work and found the place locked and chained, the employer's gone, nobody to tell them where they're going to get their money from. And so this marks today the end of an era that will introduce for the people of Barbados, for the workers of Barbados, true protection. Now, sir, when you speak about the protection of wages, while this bill does an excellent job in so doing, there are two other elements that are necessary for the true and fullest protection of the wages of workers. We can protect today's wage through this legislation, but we must look at how we're going to protect their future wages. That has to be addressed. We can legislate protection for workers, but if we do not create the conditions for growing enterprises, expanding productivity, and increasing profitability, then there are going to be fewer wages to protect and fewer opportunities to share prosperity. Those go hand in hand if we're going to give workers that assurance that they can see genuine protection of their capacity to earn, not only now but in the future. So there has to be a broader understanding of economic citizenship. Workers must be protected from exploitation. And this is what has been shared by our colleagues here today. But employers must be protected from unproductive practices. That is why between employers and employees, there must be a partnership, a relationship in which they are working together to a common goal and to common sharing of benefits. Common sharing of benefits. When workers acquire new skills, when they embrace innovation, when they improve efficiency and contribute to higher quality output, they strengthen the enterprise that employs them. When they embrace in continuous learning, when they improve their skills, they are positioning that company to be able to be more prosperous. That is why this legislation is here, because when they do that, you must protect them from the employer seeking not to give them the benefits coming from what they themselves have produced. Now, we have a number of things that are going to be important going forward. I think one of the most important things that we need to help workers do if they're going to protect their wages, we have to help them protect the use of those wages. Financial literacy and financial management of their resources is going to be important. It does not matter how much you increase a wage if people are not able to manage it to the best benefit of themselves or their families, then it is in vain. And therefore, part of our responsibility as a government, part of the responsibility of managers of enterprises and HR, part of the responsibility of labor, part of the responsibility of finance institutions is to work with workers to help them manage their resources. Now, there's some workers that are excellent at it. All of us know people who, in days gone by, knew how to stretch a dollar, knew how to put down something for a rainy day, knew how to save up and buy a few blocks, and little by little, even if it take them 5 years, actually build a house. We have come from a people who knew how to get that done on very little wages. But some of those skills are slipping now. And so workers are not getting the enjoyment or the benefit from wages that they should, because we have allowed poor financial practices to creep into our families, and the end result is that they're not benefiting as they should. And there's nothing more frustrating than that, when you can't get your money to stretch. So we have to encourage financial literacy. We've got to encourage saving, we've got to encourage investment, and we have to encourage responsible use of their income. A protected wage that is wisely managed can become a pathway to home ownership, to owning your own business, to improving your education, and to building intergenerational wealth. It must go hand in hand with the acquisition of wages. We should encourage also the wise management of productivity at every level of the economy. Now, this is a major problem for the Barbadian economy. We have a situation where we have to look at what capital we put into business and what is the output, what is the ratio in terms of the output of labor in relation to what is invested. And it is important to be able to share this with workers. We had the story earlier where the Honourable Member for Christchurch South shared about when an owner shared with the workers what was the goal, why we needed to get there, how he proposed to get there, and what were the options open to the workers in order to engage the space. The workers were then put in a position where they could make the determination, no, we can raise the output because we want to share in the benefit. And they not only met the target, they went past the target. That's the spirit that we need to create in our businesses, because this is going to protect current wages, positioning our workers to be able to earn more. And therefore, providing that training is important. So productivity is not an economic statistic, it is the foundation on which people are going to raise their standard of living. And if we're going to help workers with the protection of wages, we have to help them to protect how they use it so that they're able to maximize benefit. Now, the role of labor in the whole protection of wages has been an important one. I had the good fortune to live opposite one of the most noted labor unionists this country has ever had. And therefore, I often had the opportunity to hear him speak and share on the conditions and the things that workers face, and to share the purpose of the labor movement. That's why I'm proud to be a part of the Barbados Labour Party, because we are a Labour Party. Despite all the talk out there, despite all of the mud that is thrown at us, trying to suggest that we do not care for workers, our work demonstrates our focus and demonstrates our commitment to the workers of this country. So the labor movement has historically played a very critical role in not only securing fair wages, but advocating for decent working conditions and ensuring that there is social justice. And it is important, part of their role has to be educating employers on how the shoe fits on the other side, helping those of us who are policymakers to understand how legislation impacts on the other side. Advocacy is what they're here to do. But in the 21st century, labor advocacy must not only be protective, it also has to be developmental. It's not only to seek a larger share of the existing profits, but it must also help create the conditions for greater profits to exist. When you do so, what you do is create the conditions whereby increased benefits, working conditions, wages, etc., even profit sharing can begin to happen for workers, because you know you have created the bounty within that organization, and therefore you have a good ground on which to stand firm and advocate for that improvement for your workers. Very important. So wise labor advocacy encourages cooperation between workers and employers. It need not be a hostile relationship. Employers need to honor their commitments. They need to treat people like human beings and ask themselves, how would I want to be treated if I was working in this condition or in this position? And ensure that there is fairness within their operation. And at the same time, the worker has to recognize that the business is also a part of their own future and is a part of their own progress, and that they have just as much to depend on in the business as does the owner, and that they have to be able to benefit. So we need to encourage cooperation between workers and employers. So labor advocacy should promote training, innovation, productivity enhancement, and workplace harmony. And I am pleased to say that within the Ministry of Technological and Vocational Training, I've already had the privilege of speaking with two of the labor unions. And I'm happy to see that they understand clearly the importance of going beyond just acquiring the wages and the conditions, but understanding what is important for the success of workers in a thriving enterprise, and therefore have been very receptive to the notion of continuous learning, very receptive to understanding that we need to help workers to keep on developing and upskilling and reskilling, understanding that they need to help workers embrace the change, and that change will mean that there are things that are going to be different for them in order to make it better for all workers. And so I'm pleased to see that our unions are already embracing that, and indeed stepping forward to put it on the table as a part of the wider discussion. Because what we do together as labor, what we do together as managers, what we do together as government, it is not merely to divide the economic pie fairly. It must be that everybody must become partners in the creation of wealth. And this transition to the creation of wealth is important. Our mindset does not naturally think that way. because of our history, because of how we've been brought up, because of what we've heard, because of what is exampled in front of us. But the time must come when around the dinner table of every Barbadian, our children hear their parents speaking about entrepreneurship, speaking about assets, speaking about investment, speaking about productivity, speaking about getting shares and bonds. We need to change the conversation at the dinner table if we are going to protect the wages and the future earnings of our young people. One of the lessons I think they need to understand, some workers do, all do not. But when profits rise, because workers and employers work together to improve performance, it actually enhances how the worker can succeed through increased wages, better conditions, and opportunities for entrepreneurship. I'll explain what I'm saying. I had the privilege of doing training all across this country. And I remember when we were doing financial management training in the tourism sector, and we were able to point out to workers that work was not just about the money you collect at the end of the week, but there were opportunities that sit here. And quite a few of them managed to catch the idea, and they said, you know what I could do differently, I have other skills. I can do things other than the job that I have been hired to do. And many of them started to do negotiations with their workers to be able to sell things, for example, in the shops that were at the hotels, to sell food products to the kitchen, to the food and beverage department, to be able to offer additional services to their guests, because they recognized that they could get into entrepreneurship and therefore improve their income earning. And this is something that we need to ensure we emphasize in training up the next generation of workers. Now, when we talk about the issue of the protection of wages, and we talk about having the knowledge and skills to manage their earnings wisely, what we're talking about here is that if we are going to advocate for increased wages, that we must make sure that wage negotiations are evidence-based. Now, too often, employers like to hide what they're earning. They like to hide the true costs. They like to hide how much profit they're making. And some of them try to find creative ways to make sure that the union and the workers don't get an understanding of what is really going on. What that leads to is not only high suspicion, it also leads to people assuming that you have a lot more than you actually have, which then tarnishes the negotiations, because now we're not comparing apples with apples, we're not dealing with the same facts, we're not dealing with the same information. So it is important that wage negotiations are evidence-based. It is also important that we also have productivity gains and that employees participate in discussions about workplace performance so that they can understand the link between how they perform and what it is that they earn. And I think that this is critical. I have a dream for a Barbados where if we have managers who manage and make good decisions, and we have supervisors who understand the management of their human resource function, and we have workers who understand the importance of productivity, not just when the supervisor is looking, but even more so when they're not looking, that if we build vibrant enterprises, here is what will happen, Mr. Speaker. Once those businesses grow, there are opportunities for promotion. That allows workers to move up within their own organizations. That gives them more wages. When an organization expands and it's taken on more people. It allows the dreams of our children, our young people, sometimes the same children of workers, to have the opportunity to get that first job. But it only happens if that company is profitable. This guarantees a new generation of Barbadians getting a wage. Once you have that level of growth and you get higher demands within the economy, it creates space for the formation of new businesses. And this is where workers who have developed a high level of expertise now recognize, well, I could go out and start my own. I could go and do my own business and start to employ other people. What that does, it creates a vibrant economy that is growing, that is expanding, and providing the conditions by which Barbadians can dream and see the possibility of that dream. One of the things that hurt me, Mr. Speaker, was we would have encouraged many of our children to go and study, get an education, get a degree, in the hope that they would be able to get the type of job that their degree or their qualifications should allow them to have, only to come out to find that the economy could not sustain them. And what this did, it led to disillusionment among our young people. What it also did was it created a glut in the labor force, which then meant that it put and exerted downward pressure on wages. And when you put downward pressure on wages, that creates lack in homes, creates lack at the dinner table. And we have had the unfortunate circumstance where we have seen young people with degrees finding themselves having to work at gas stations, having to work at certain types of jobs that don't necessarily reflect the training that they were trained for. And what it means is that their income now will stay at a lower level, all because we could not bring the vibrancy to the economy. So I want to end by saying, Mr. Speaker, that the three things must go hand in hand. We must have, one, that workers are protected and given good working conditions, that they're given the information and given the hearing so that they can be motivated to work. We secondly need workers who understand that work is not just about, I just want to get a paycheck, but I don't really want to work hard. Many employers struggle with employees who do not come with any intention to work hard. That is just the truth. If we can turn that and have workers who are prepared to give good service, to get to work on time, to minimize absenteeism, to minimize the abuse of sick leave, we will get a higher output. So if we could fix that second thing, that would be excellent. And then if we can grow our enterprises to create greater profitability, we will create the foundation for good future wages for our workers, who will then find themselves in a position where they can honor the dreams of their children and their family because they see how they're going to be able to achieve this. And I want to encourage all of the employees, all of the employers, to reach out to the ministry that is dealing with financial literacy. It is something that is desperately needed in Barbados, and we need to ensure that people learn how to better manage their resources so that their monies can go further and that they can achieve their dreams. Because there's nothing worse than a bottled up dream, frustrating a person, dominating their minds, sapping their drive, sapping their energy. Anytime too many of our Barbadian citizens are in that mindset, Barbados cannot prosper because it cannot get the best from its people. So forward ever, sir, to a productive Barbados, forward ever to better conditions for our workers, forward ever for our employers, making sure that they honor their responsibilities to their workers and honor their responsibility to their organizations to build a stronger and better Barbados. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honourable St. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I too want to add my voice in supporting this piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, when I first saw the bill, it took me back to a time, and I'm glad that the Honourable Prime Minister took us back to that period and reminded us that the struggle for fair wages did not start yesterday. It didn't start 60 years ago. But that struggle started over hundreds of years ago on the plantation when we were brought here, Mr. Speaker. Now, we were brought here not with any good intentions, for our welfare, certainly. And we were forced to work in a situation where we had no protection, Mr. Speaker. We had no wages. We had no contract. There was no tribunal to complain to, no medical care, nothing. The only obligation we had was to work. But there were no obligations to pay us. Mr. Speaker, we had no land, no house, nothing. And that continued for hundreds of years until 1834, and then we experienced something called emancipation. Now, we have spoken so much in the past here, especially about the lost decade. But very little is spoken about the lost century. And there was a century in this country's history, starting from, say, around 1834, 35, 36, 37, right up to 1937, to the disturbances, to the riots in 1937, where though the literature, the historians are silent, there's not a lot of academic work and literature on that period between, say, 1837 and 1937. But what we do know is that our people were smelling hell during those years. We know that our people were suffering during those years. We know that our people were forced to work for very low wages during those years. We know that children had to work alongside their parents. We know that the conditions were unsafe. We know that the conditions were hard. We know the living conditions were difficult. Now, we don't see that in writing, but we know that that's how it was in that 100 years that we don't really read about in our literature. And there was a text that we learned, we read when I was back at university studying history, and they taught us about the flight from the plantation. Now, in Guyana, persons who were enslaved, who were now free, could run and go and live in the bush. In Jamaica, they could do it. In Suriname, they could do it. In Trinidad, they could do it. But right here in Barbados, they could not do it. There was no bush to go and run and hide. There was no place to go. Persons were forced to remain right there on the plantation and take whatever terms and conditions that were shoveled at them. There was no negotiating power. There was no political power. There was no one that you can turn to that would assist you, that would defend you, that would stand by you, that would work for you. People had to take what they get. And that is the reality of the working class in Barbados. That is the reality of the people in Barbados. And believe you me, by then, that plantation class had learned all of those skills that came out of that Victorian era back in the 1800s in London and in other parts of Europe. They learned all the skills to exploit workers. So even though we were considered to be free, emancipated, the fact that we were still trapped on the plantation meant that we never experienced that emotion. We never experienced what freedom felt like. And the plantation class took the opportunity to exploit the workers in the same way that workers were being exploited in Europe. You imagine in Europe you had a situation where, and I'm glad that it was addressed in this bill, and I'm going to be honest, I thought that that was addressed a long time ago, where persons were paid in vouchers and paid in coupons and all such like. All of these things used to ensure that people could not earn any money. People were paid in taverns and bars. So as soon as they get the money gone. And those same techniques, those same strategies were transplanted here in Barbados, where some of the plantation owners own a rum shop. And they would pay the workers in the rum shop. So as soon as they get the money gone straight back into rum, and those people could never get home, could never find money to take home to their hungry children and their wives, because the money was spent right there. Paid people in clubs. You pay a man downstairs and there's somebody upstairs waiting for him to come up so you can get that money. So in England, all of that was banned because people understood you had to protect workers, you had to protect them from the employer, and in some cases you had to protect them from themselves. And that gave rise to a number of labor laws that came out in the 1930s or so, when people realized, no, something was wrong. We cannot continue to exploit workers. But our plantation class had learned that very well from their cousins in Europe. And they deployed it very well here in the Caribbean for years, for decades after slavery. And I'm glad that one of the things that was addressed in this particular piece of legislation, and it's the first thing I touched on, is the fact that you can't pay people in certain places. You can't pay people in places of entertainment. I know that term can be extended to mean certain things. Unless they work there. You can't pay them in a gambling den. Because you know if a man has a gambling problem, and you pay him, what's the first thing he's going to do with the money? You gamble it out. I've seen people, as soon as they get paid, go and gamble all their money. And they stand up and they feel in their pocket, and they're squeezing, they're going on through the pockets, hoping that they can find a piece of change. And if they shut their eyes, they cry, water will run out, as the old people would say. You see this, and people understood that. And that's why this legislation speaks to paying persons in certain locations on certain premises. Don't pay people in the clubs. Can't pay people in the rum shop, in the bars, any place that sells alcohol. This legislation speaks to that. Mr. Speaker, every generation, including our forefathers, would have fought to ensure that workers' rights were protected. And I think what we are doing here is just a continuation of what other generations would have done before. In the 1950s, would have seen the introduction of legislation to protect the wages, protect the workers. Trade unions would have played their role. Persons would have had discussions, persons would have protested, and now we are here as a parliament, and our role now is to continue that work to ensure that not only do we continue to build on the work that was done by our founding fathers, but also ensure that what we do protects future workers going forward, including the modernization of the economy here. And you cannot have a modern economy without modern ways of paying persons. And that's why I'm happy to see that this bill has also looked at the ways that persons are to be paid. There are some unscrupulous employers out there, Mr. Speaker, who will let a man work for a whole week. And these things that happen, you got in the country, in the villages, people working for you for a whole week, working as domestics, all these kind of jobs, expecting the money when the Friday come. And then on that Friday, you are going to tell them, well, you know, right now I'm not holding right now, so you may have to hold on until I get something. Those things are wrong. Those things are unfair. Those things are immoral, but people do them every day in Barbados. Not the vast majority. I'm certain that there are very few people who do it. But having said that, there's still too many people who do it. And the persons that they do it to, in many cases, don't even know where to turn to in the event that happens. So they have little or no recourse. They just barely wait until the Monday or the Tuesday or the Wednesday or whenever the employer feels like paying them, and they get their money. But we're saying that that is illegal. It's not only wrong, immoral, but it's also illegal. And persons who do that, employers who do that to poor people in this country will face the consequences. And I'm glad that that's being addressed in this particular bill. Let me just read the offense here. Some of the offenses. The fact that if you deduct money from a person's wage, the people that you can go to someone and tell them, well, he owed me money. And without any permission being granted, you go and short pay the person, as we call it, short pay the person to pay somebody else. You can't do that. Just so. We have a situation where you have been paying in cash all along. Then all of a sudden, you decide that you're going to pay in check. Now that's all well and good. But you have to give the worker at least 2 weeks notice so that they can adjust themselves. I'm not accustomed to getting cash money in the hand and spending cash money, live cash money. It's not going to just adjust easily to a check where he has to go to the bank, has to leave a little early. You got to give him a little time to leave a little early now on Fridays or whenever, so you can get to the bank in time so you can change that check. So these are things too you have to also put in place before you can just switch on people, as we've been doing in the past. I was just looking here at the bill to look at some of the fines. And it says here that if an employer makes any deduction from the wages of any employee or receive any payment, or any payment from that employee and fails to pay in those wages for the reason that they were deducted for, people do that all the time, you know. There are people over the years been deducting NIS deductions from people's money for years, and then when the people go out there, not a cent. Not a cent. And people there struggling, scratching their heads. And every month, this money, or every week, this money coming out. But no, those persons that do that, those employers that do that, can see themselves facing a fine of $20,000 or imprisonment of up to 12 months or both. And if you can do that to a poor person, I believe that 12 months or $20,000 is probably the least that they can do to you. The other aspects of this bill too that I think I like the fact that they've taken a more modern approach to, as I said, to paying persons can now be paid in cash, paid in check. Of course, people were paid in check, but money could be deposited to people's accounts. All of the modern trappings that you find in any modern society now, we don't have the access to pay persons in that way. What you can't do is pay them in change, and find change. And that's something that you only do spitefully. But at the same time, whether it's spitefully or not, it is now prohibited, and it cannot be done paying people $200 and $300 in fine change, just to prove a point. So this bill understands that there are certain groups within our community, within societies that need to be protected. There are certain people that have been exploited forever amongst the working class, and we have to do our bit to ensure that there's a level of fairness and a level of dignity extended towards these particular workers. This must be justice. People cannot continue to unfair workers in this country. It cannot happen. And I think this bill is a step in the right direction to ensuring that this government does what it can to ensure that employers do right by workers in this country. And Mr. Speaker, as I close, I want to start as I had begun by saying that this struggle did not just start. This is a struggle that continued from the days when we came here fighting and kicking on slave ships and were forced to work for nothing in our hands, had to take what the plantation class gave us until we got to the point where we couldn't take it no more. And we fought back, and we've been fighting ever since, and we will continue to fight. And this bill gives us the strength to continue to fight on behalf of the poor people in this country. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I want to fully associate myself with this piece of legislation and give the Minister and his team and the member for St. George North for the work that she's been doing to ensure that workers in this country, rights are protected. My full support. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member St. Michael West Central.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me make it very clear at the outset that I support the bill, the Protection of Wages Bill, before this Honourable Chamber. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Honourable Member for St. Peter is a man who, albeit trained in finance, enjoys the area of human resources, and therefore it should be no surprise to anyone the fact that he brings such overarching pieces of legislation to this Honourable Chamber. Mr. Speaker, I have had the benefit as well working in the private sector. I'm in government now, but in private sector I also had the opportunity to dabble in human resources and also in industrial relations. And for the full disclosure of this House, but I'm sure it is already well known, that I serve as the president of the Barbados Employers Confederation from 2008 until 2016. And I start there, Mr. Speaker, because it is important for Barbados to know that the Barbados Workers Union is a union, and the Barbados Workers and the Barbados Employers Confederation is also a union of employers. So we have both unions at work. But I must tell you that the Barbados Workers Union and the Barbados Employers Confederation over the years have worked to build what we now refer to as our very voluntaristic system of industrial relations in Barbados. It is well known that both organizations must be credited for the steps that they have taken, not only to deal with matters of conciliation, but also to maintain that wonderful model that we have here in Barbados as it relates to resolving industrial disputes and also their work in building collective bargaining to the levels of which we have built. Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely no denying that good industrial relations must remain a moral pillar which builds on conditions of service and also respect. Mr. Speaker, I believe the Honourable Member for St. Peter and others would have made it clear in here today that not all employers are bad employers, but you also have some who perhaps don't have the benefit of good advice, are often doing things that sometimes go contrary to the law or contrary to established norms in industrial relations practices. Mr. Speaker, I have worked, like I said, in the private sector. Having worked in the private sector, I would have seen both sides. I would have seen where obviously workers would have benefited from a number of programs, through employee assistance programs as well. And I would have also seen, for example, the average length of stay that workers would have enjoyed with companies in the private sector. But I am also aware that there is oftentimes a lot of miscommunication, misunderstandings that oftentimes, if not resolved through dispute resolution, could create no end of problems and create industrial dislocation. Mr. Speaker, that is why I continue to make the point that yes, the country needs private sector investment and to grow the economy, and at the same time, workers also demand fairness and respect. In that respect, I know this year the Barbados Employers Confederation will be celebrating, they will be celebrating the 70th anniversary of their existence. And I make the point that the BC has always had, in my view, strong leadership, going back to the days when you had executive directors that dealt with the likes of the right excellent leader of the Barbados Workers Union, not only Sir Hugh Springer and Sir Frank Walcott and Sir Roy Trotman and others, but they've also had, in my view, a lot of competent staff who are there to advise and guide employers with respect to current employment practices. And oftentimes when we have these situations arising in the country is oftentimes because, one, they have not perhaps engaged the Employers Confederation as a union that can help guide them and advise them, who are competent and credible in that area. And therefore, I believe it's necessary going forward that a lot of persons and so a lot of employers who are not members, for example, of the Employers Confederation should do so, because you get the proper guidance and you have precedents that they'll be able to guide you on, and you also have a set of collective bargaining norms that you have to adhere to. Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the bill is timely and very important. When you look, for example, at what is happening globally, terms and conditions of employment are not fixed. From time to time, you have to move. There are conditions of service that have to be modified through collective discussions. They may be modified because of what is happening in the global arena. They may be modified because of local changes to our legislation. And therefore, it's necessary that us as legislators, that we, from time to time, make meaningful changes to bills. And that is what we're doing on this occasion. Environment has changed, and therefore the government and legislators in here owe it not only to the country, but to the people to ensure that we make changes to existing legislation. It is no different, Mr. Speaker, from what obtained in the past. You had situations, Mr. Speaker, when you would have had the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams responding to deplorable conditions back in the day. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you would have had the Right Excellent Sir Frank Walcott as well, and others who would have worked with Labour, including Sir Hugh Springer, to ensure that we develop Labour as it is today. So present day legislation must, of course, reflect what is happening within our market. Mr. Speaker, that is why, in reality, there's such legislation. Legislation, of course, will lay out the rights, will lay out responsibilities, and of course, Mr. Speaker, the benefits and penalties, of course, that if applied fairly would not result in any major dislocation And that is what we've sought to do and build in Barbados with respect to our industrial relations climate. Mr. Speaker, I have for a long time argued that we need to bring all of the relevant pieces of labor legislation into one place. And I did so, Mr. Speaker, when I was president of the Barbados Employers Confederation, when we were not this government, but another government dealing with the Employment Rights Bill. I felt then, and it's on record, and I still maintain the position now, that we ought perhaps to harmonize labor legislation and put it in one place, bring it together. I think, for example, when you look at the wages and salaries, I'll give an example. As it relates to wages and salaries, and I took the opportunity yesterday, last night, to go through it. There are 5 pieces of legislation dealing with wages and our salaries. You have the Protection of Wages Act, as we are amending today, and rightly so. The Holidays Will Pay Act, the Severance Payments Act, the Employment Rights Act, and also the Minimum Wage Act. I believe, and then there are other pieces of legislation. I didn't talk about the Sexual Harassment Act, for example, the Shops Act, and of course the Shaw Act. But as it relates to perhaps wages, you have at least 5 pieces of legislation relating to that. Now, as I said, I made this point. I made that point when I was president of the Barbados Employers Confederation. But I really think it will go a long way, because oftentimes you have employers, and to the benefit of employees too, employees who don't have the time to research, or they don't know where to go and look to research it. Simple as it sounds, it might come across as though, well, they should know. But oftentimes, these people do not know, and sometimes workers don't know as well. So I believe that if, and maybe at some appropriate time, perhaps a consideration could be given to harmonizing labor legislation to ensure that a lot of the employers and the employees can go to one place, look at the legislation, read it, and ensure when they have the time to ensure that their rights are protected. Mr. Speaker, I'm reminded that there was a survey done, I believe it was in 2024, the results published only this year, where small and medium-sized enterprises in Barbados accounted for over 98% of businesses and employing more than half of the private sector. And based on the results of that, that will tell you, so if you have a lot of small businesses and they can't employ a HR manager, or they can't employ all these IR specialists, or they can't pay consultants, but if they have an opportunity where they can, either that's what I made the point, you join the Barbados, and not I'm putting a plug, Mr. Speaker, for the Employers Confederation, because I can't do that because of my role now as a legislator. But I can certainly urge and recommend that they join. And if they do so, it will be in their best interest so they can take and have the benefit of good advice, at least if they take the advice of the Employers Confederation. But recognizing that you have over 98% of Barbados public sector focusing on businesses that employ more than half within the private sector, it tells you the story there where we have to go. Mr. Speaker, the point of the job registry is made already, so I'm not going to go through that. But I'm not a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, but you are adept at these matters, sir. Not only criminal, sir, because your training is extensive, sir, in law. I don't know, maybe the time has come, and I believe the time has come, Mr. Speaker, that we really have to settle this issue of what is a contract for service and what is a contract of service. Maybe the Minister of Labour may correct me because it may already be there. But too often, Mr. Speaker, too often, you get the same repeated concerns about what is a contract for service and what is a contract of service. And I really think that employees in this country now must be settled on this matter. I really and truly believe so. Mr. Speaker, I can take you to case law. But if I take you to case law, they might say I'm the fly-by-night lawyer, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable, I hope that if you take me to case law, that you take me to the not only the relevant one, but the most updated one.
Oh yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, but I don't know if it's that updated. But last night in my research for my presentation on the bill, I went to that famous case of we call it the Sagicor case, Mr. Speaker.
You want dealing with the agent,
That is correct.
independent contractor.
That is correct. And I believe it was lodged in the court, and it was suits number 1050, 1051, 1052, and 1053 of 2006. And Mr. Speaker, perhaps some people may want to understand his song as though you know what you're talking about. But there's a gentleman, I asked you for permission to call his name, but I don't think you would ask me to, or ask the marshals to escort me from the chamber, because I would say that Leroy Ennis was perhaps one person who taught me a lot, and he schooled me in matters of law. And
I remember that was one of Justice Ennis' specialty was employment law. That was
That's correct, sir. Right. And I recall in that case, the case of 2006, the then Chief Justice Simmons, was asked to opine on the case and give a ruling. Mr. Speaker, and he ruled that these were employees who were employed under a contract of service. Because, according to him, and I made sure I don't want to mislead the chamber, because of the control test, the integration test, Mr. Speaker, and of course, some people may argue of late the economic reality test. So, Mr. Speaker, there is a body of law. And well, member for St. James Central is schooling me as well. He says jurisprudence, sir. But I am not schooling the law, so I would take your advice and his as well. But I really think, if at all possible, and the minister and his ministry can put this to rest, or he can correct me if I'm wrong and say, look, this matter, honourable member, has already been dealt with. But there are too many situations involving persons who really and truly ought to be so recognized. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to detain the chamber unduly, except to say, and I heard other members speaking about productivity. It is a serious issue in Barbados. We have to reach the stage now in this country where we must face this issue, Mr. Speaker. We must look to see how best we can also fix it, because if we can resolve the issue of enhancing productivity, I think it will take the country and we will go further. Mr. Speaker, I also believe, as a prerequisite to maybe addressing some of the matters associated with sick leave and so on. Some people argue excessive sick leave. But there's, and we have within collective agreements in Barbados, where oftentimes workers are given personal days off. And I think it's something that employers should start looking to do as they broaden the wellness of employees within their workforce. Oftentimes, people are not sick, but they have perhaps some commitments. And because the commitments can be honored during working time, they may elect, Mr. Speaker, to call and notify the employer that they can't come to work. So I think, and I know we will get there, I think it's an opportunity for us to look to that. Mr. Speaker, I also welcome the initiative announced by the Prime Minister in respect of the Competitiveness Commission. I think it is relevant. It would help us not only with productivity, but with other matters. But I also think, and I believe it's co-chaired by the Honourable Member for St. George North and one other private person from the private sector. I look forward to the work of that commission, because it's necessary at this point in time, because we have to ensure, as we continue to grow Barbados and to grow the economy, that we have fairness in the system for both workers, of course, and employers. Mr. Speaker, I'm also aware that mental health is also a major issue in the workplace. These are issues that are critical to the success of the working environment and certainly in this country. It is an issue that we have to contend with. I'm aware that the Ministry of Health and Wellness, they continue to develop policies to address health and wellness, and that is, in my judgment, a significant component of what we have to advance. Health and wellness, effective health and wellness in the work environment will also, in my judgment, boost productivity. So on the one hand, you're not saying that you can say that we have a productivity challenge, but not address it. I'm also suggesting that we strengthen the workforce with with these strategies and with these relevant wellness programs in order to ensure that we continue. Mr. Speaker, I also believe, and I know that the Ministry of Labour, they have done a lot of work in this respect in terms of education. I am aware, for example, you see a lot of programs reminding employees and employers of their duties, and I commend the ministry for that as well. I also will commend the minister, the Honourable Member for St. Peter, for the publication of decisions of the Employment Rights Tribunal. I've had an opportunity to read the first volume. I thought the Honourable Member for St. Lucie would have recited a case that came out in law in the ERT regarding a mortician in his constituency, but he didn't do so. He didn't take that particular matter and discuss it here. The Honourable Member is laughing because he wants me to remind him of the case of Shaquilia Johnson versus Ian Griffith Mortuary Services. And for his enjoyment tonight, if he has a copy of the decisions of the Employment Rights Tribunal, I would refer him to the ERT case of 2018/36. You say I pull that from my memory and not from notes, sir. I'm not going into the details of that, but I leave it for the Honourable Member for St. Lucie. When he is in the political hustings, to remind the people of St. Lucie about that particular employment rights decision. But Mr. Speaker, he will give you the Honourable Member. I would not steal his thunder. But I want to commend the Ministry of Labour for the continuing education program. Take note that I said for employees as well as employers. The decisions published by the Employment Rights Tribunal require reading. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that every human resource practitioner in this country should read, I don't know if he's on volume 2 or 3 yet, but should read the decisions of the Employment Rights Tribunal. I think it will go a long way, not only educating themselves and putting them in a position to be informed, but also using that body and wealth of knowledge to help them when they are dispensing certain actions or they are called upon to advise an employer or manager in this country as to what is required with respect to that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I ask how many people in Barbados know that they know, if they know they have a right of recourse to a severance payments tribunal for severance payment, Mr. Speaker, I think it will probably alarm you. And these are things, Mr. Speaker, and that is why I support the educational campaign, the sensitization on the part of the ministry, because we have to ensure that we understand what we are about in this country. Mr. Speaker, let me also commend the Ministry of Labour for engaging and contracting through the Ministry of Public Service and Talent Development more labour officers. I heard the minister made the point that they have, I believe it was here maybe in the budget debate, and I speak under correction, where he commended the newly hired, and also I believe in his introductory speech to here when he commended the work of the labour officers. But the fact that they have employed even more labour officers to ensure that we can dispense the required education, the required advice, and obviously the conciliatory efforts. Mr. Speaker, I know oftentimes, and like I said, full disclosure, I came from the private sector. And sometimes when you look at laws and you don't read them properly, you may not be informed of a particular decision. I know that there's some people out there who have suggested that clauses 7, I believe 8 and 10, as it relates to advances, they're a little concerned about that. But Mr. Speaker, I want the employers of Barbados who continue to do good and right for employees in this country to continue to do so. And like I said, they're not all bad employers out there. We have a lot of very, very good employers in this country, represented not only by the commitment to their employment, the employee assistance programs. You also have those who, Mr. Speaker, help employees, but they don't broadcast it to the public. And I'm acutely aware of a lot of those. People even who have children, the children of workers when they're going to school abroad at university, if you suddenly take sick, we have all of that. But what I want to do is to encourage the private sector to continue where they, for example, you give a salary advance. I want them to continue to do those things. And where they give them, for example, other assistance, I want them to continue that. And I also want them to continue to build out health and wellness programs, and where they don't have any, that they do so as we settle to increase and boost productivity in this country. Mr. Speaker, I don't intend to detain the chamber. Perhaps I'm almost there on my time, but I really want to say that as we continue to build out labor legislation in this country, I don't want employers to be afraid. What I want them to do is I want them to get a body of advice, and I want them to use the organs available to them to ensure that they too, as they're allowed to advocate and to give comments when you're bringing bills to Parliament, that they participate and they continue the engagement with the Ministry of Labour. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that the series of and pieces of legislation that we are bringing to this Honourable Chamber, led by the Honourable Member for St. Peter, will continue to inspire us to be good employers, to be good employees, and to ensure that this country that we have to look after, that this country maintains its place within the world as a place that we continue not only to look at the levels of the International Labour Organization, but that we continue to set the example in Barbados for all future workers to follow, and for them to lead and do the right thing. And with those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I begin by thanking all the honourable members who shared, who spoke, who contributed over these 2 weeks of fulsome debate on the matter of protection of wages, as in the subject and the substance of the bill before the chamber, but who also spoke more broadly to matters impacting workers, matters related to the dignity of work, the essential humanity of workers, and the need to have that human-centered approach to decent work and decency more broadly. Now, I'm going to, in my brief wrap-up, just speak to a couple of things, but the Honourable Member for St. Michael West Central mentioned about some businesses being a little bit uncomfortable. I spoke to that, I believe, in my initial speech when I introduced the bill, and I wish to remind employers and say two things. One is that decent employers don't have anything to worry about. Decent people don't have anything to worry about. So let me speak to those who are not so decent. The reason why a legislature has to meet and debate and pass pieces of legislation like this is because we have to protect against the bad people. So, from my faith perspective, the only reason why a commandment would need to say thou shalt not steal is because they have crooks. If nobody stole, there is no need for a command to say thou shalt not steal. You need law when there is evil. And that's the bottom line. Sir Harold Bernard St. John I indicated previously, was the one who said to us, said to the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, and through her really to us, that we have to make sure that as the pharaohs arise who did not know Joseph, the Bible speaks to that, there arose a pharaoh who knew not Joseph. When those pharaohs arise, we have to make sure there are guardrails so they don't go over the edge. Somebody mentioned earlier, we got to protect people sometimes from themselves. So those who are decent can continue to live life quite easily. Those who are not, we will, as the Honourable Prime Minister indicated earlier, we will make sure that we have an intense campaign to educate, to sensitize workers and employers, and even those who are outside of an employment relationship. There is one matter that caused some of the decent employers a bit of concern. The Honourable Member for St. Michael West Central spoke to it to some degree just now. And this relates to businesses that are in the business, organizations that are in the business of extending credit facilities through hire purchase, through loans. And we know that those decent organizations will extend credit at preferential rates to their employees. Now, the legislation, the bill, as it is currently drafted, we believe satisfies that. In other words, loan advances, cash advances, those things that we speak to with respect to the 1/3 limit, and also with respect to not being able to charge interest. We believe that the bill is quite clear that, as it is phrased, would not extend to a loan or a mortgage that a commercial bank or credit union, and I need to start using those terms in a different order, credit union or commercial bank, that it would not extend to a facility that is in the ordinary course of business, as opposed to a cash advance on a future receipt of salary. Nevertheless, we believe that for the avoidance of doubt, and primarily to make sure that workers do not lose benefits that they currently enjoy, or that organizations that extend credit do not feel scared about continuing to give loans or other credit facilities to their employees at preferential rates, that we will make an amendment to that particular provision that's going to be in Clause 7 when we get to the committee stage. I just therefore want to assure the employers who are concerned that we will make it clearer in the bill as we introduce the amendment in the committee stage. The Honourable Member for St. Michael West Central also spoke to laws, and I just briefly want to say, to support what he has said, leaders of organizations that employ people and their HR or people development officers and managers need to become familiar with the law and with cases. I, like he, spent all my life in the private sector. The challenge with people who are supposed to be leading in industrial relations is that too many of them, not all, maybe not the majority, but too many of them are not familiar properly with the law, and more importantly, as far as I'm concerned, and when I practice, more importantly, cases, because the cases speak to certain precedent. So that we spoke about the Sagicor case, there's the Caribbean Label Crafts case, there's the June Clark case. There are a number of cases that there's the St. James Beach Hotels one. Both the Honourable Member for St. Michael West Central and I were at the organization. The Honourable Member for St. Thomas knows it very well. The intimately familiar. The ruling kind of shocked me, but you have to be familiar. That allows you to practice good industrial relations and not make stupid errors. Now, the Barbados Workers Union, in the Honourable Member for St. George North's contribution, spoke to the matter of a time limit for the recovery of overpayment. We have considered this, and I've made it very clear in this Honourable Chamber before, and I've made it clear outside of this Honourable Chamber. I have no difficulty in amending to improve. And so while there are those who may say it should have been done before it got here, if, Mr. Speaker, somebody tells me something right now that would make a material difference, I would make the amendment right now. And so I'm saying to this Honourable Chamber that we will be making an amendment to make sure that there is that limit included in this bill. There were some other matters that were raised that will be the subject of further discussion, and as soon as we have sorted them out, however soon that is, we will make any necessary adjustments. Now, the Honourable Member for St. George North also spoke to the matter of minimum wage. And Section 8 of the Minimum Wage Act, she particularly indicated some difficulty in getting a straight answer from the Ministry of Labour. So I just want to say that Section 8(2) in the Minimum Wage Act is very clear. And I'm saying this in the presence of some of my very hard-working officers who are here in the chamber today. Where an employer pays an employee A, an incentive-based payment or commission, B, a monetary allowance, C, a payment for overtime, or D, any other additional sums, the payment of these sums, A, B, C, D, shall not be discontinued, comma, but shall, comma, where the terms and conditions of the employee's contract and the duties performed so require, continue to be paid in addition to the sum prescribed in the minimum wage order. That is clear for me. If it has not been clear for the Labour Department, it is now pellucid. The law is unambiguous in this matter. So this is probably not for the benefit of the Honourable Member for St. George North, but for the benefit of the public and also anyone in the ministry who may not be fully clear. The matter of education is being spoken to by a number of honourable members, including the Honourable Member for St. Michael North East, the Honourable Prime Minister, West Central, and a number of other members. That is something that we will be working on assiduously. I'm happy that the Honourable Member for St. Michael West Central spoke to the publication of the decisions of the tribunal. Now, we have published up to a point. We now have to look for some funding to publish additional cases, so that I want to give the assurance that the publishing of cases will be an ongoing matter, an ongoing process. Once we've come to the point where we have sufficient to put into a volume, then we will do that. We will also need to, given that we're in 2026, not bind ourselves to printed volumes. And so the matter of making them available electronically in a space where they're easy to access is something that the Deputy Chief Labour Officer will make a note of and make sure that we get to that point. There was also a mention of sports persons not being able to register as self-employed persons. Now, my investigations suggest that that should not or is not the case. However, I do know that from time to time, and what I say, as tough as I might be on others, I'm also tough internally. So I will not go out on a limb to say that a sports person has never been turned down, because sometimes ministers are told what people feel ministers want to hear or should hear. I'm also aware that from time to time there are some small p popes who arise, and so I'm just saying, if there is any challenge by a sports person trying to register as a self-employed person at the National Insurance and Social Security Service, that person should speak, if they're getting trouble down the line, speak to the CEO, or you can speak to me at the ministry's office. Sports persons, there are some who are registered. I saw a list, and I see some who I know as sports persons to be, who I know to be sports persons, who I see as registered. The Honourable Member for Christchurch South spoke to Convention 193. I'm not going to speak to the hard work that is involved, but I just mention it here because I want to support the point made that for the first time, even though this new convention speaks to platform work, the delivery, Ubers and the delivery services, it also fundamentally addresses gig work and the protections for gig workers who are entrepreneurial in their approach, in their outlook. It says to the world through this new convention that protection is not limited to employees. My officers will tell you that I say that to them quite often. Industrial relations practitioners have, I would almost call it a fetish, believing that the focus ought only to be on employees. This Barbados Labour Party and this Minister of Labour is focused on workers, not only employees. This protection of wages bill is predicated on accurate classification. So it speaks to protection of wages, which are earnings through employment. But I want to say that we, at the core of all that we do, in terms of protecting to allow for productivity, we are addressing the matter of workers and the work that workers do. Now, I spoke to classification because there was another mention by the Honourable Member for St. George North about agreements for cooperation. And this is one of the areas that we will be going back to, only because there are those, and this was mentioned a little bit earlier by one of the Honourable Members, there are persons in organizations who seek to escape particularly their statutory responsibilities by calling people subcontractors, calling people self-employed, calling them entrepreneurs, when they are not properly entrepreneurs. And the Honourable Member St. Michael West Central spoke to the various tests that exist. I'll say to him that we have case law in terms of the Sagicor case. We also have the schedule in the Employment Rights Act. And we now have at the National Insurance and Social Security Service 2 opinions. One internal, developed by the legal department within the National Insurance and Social Security Service, and one by external counsel who they engage to be able to compare and to verify. So I think we have sufficient. The reason why we will never be able to get rid totally of challenges is because there are always degrees of. So a control test, and the thing is that the tests they work together. And there are always degrees of that sometimes are difficult to parse or to separate. They're not discrete. They're not scientific, it's like social science. Not discrete, not absolute answers, but sometimes variations in terms of degree. So there will continue, we believe, to be situations where somebody has to make a judgment, and one judgment may go against the feeling of somebody else. But that is a matter that we are addressing. I'm saying that to the honourable member through you, Mr. Speaker, because it is one that we will not tolerate people hiding to get away from their responsibilities. Not just statutory responsibilities, but these are ultimately responsibilities to people. Making sure that people, particularly in the matter of Social Security, are taken care of. And that includes the work that we're going to do with respect to the portability of benefits. Now, I think, Mr. Speaker, those are the main matters that came before us. I add my voice to those who indicate that this bill today is part of a continuum. This is part of a continuum. In 1675 in this country, workers were planning to rise up. Coffee was the inspiration for that. Workers attempting to rise up to throw off the shackles, to throw off domination. In 1816, another major attempt. Small attempts in between, even before 1675, but these are the major plans. 1926, I mentioned this a few weeks ago. Sir Charles Duncan O'Neill, the Working Men's Association, 100 years ago this year. That struggle, continuing struggle. 1936, 90 years ago this year, Eunice Gibson and the Barbados Nurses, back then Registered Nurses Association. That struggle, even before the 37 uprising. But then 37, 26th of July, the Honourable Prime Minister spoke to that. 1938, this great party established as another step. Then 85 years ago, 1941, out of this party, a workers' organization. Mr. Speaker, this is part of a continuum. We, in this chamber, in 2026, we will not reach the finish line. But we have to be faithful in our work in advancing that struggle, in making sure, and I hate to use Americanisms, we need to develop one of our own, but they talk about making a more perfect union. We are working toward a better work situation, dignity of work, decency of work. This is part of a process. This bill before the Honourable Chamber today is part of that process. We pledge, like those who have gone before us, to do all in our power in the space in which we stand to advance the cause of those who are the creators of wealth in this country and in all countries. And I say this country and all countries because, as the Honourable Prime Minister said, our work as a Barbados Labour Party is not limited to our country. We recognize that we have a responsibility. She said it well, we gave to the world 1661, the slave code. a lot of the Confederacy and the Jim Crow that we see in the US has its origins in here. Well, I don't think it was here then, but wherever it met, maybe in the old town hall. But this parliament, not this location, but this parliament, we give that to the world. We are executing on our responsibility to reverse that. And so in this parliament, now, and on the international stage, this Barbados Labour Party has committed itself to making sure that we do right by the people of this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am happy to have piloted this and to share these few words by way of conclusion. Again, I commit myself and I commit on behalf of my officers at the Labour Department and in the wider ministry responsible for labour that we will do all the educating that is necessary, both for this, when it becomes a law, as I expect it to, and all the other recent legislation, including laws, but also regulations, orders. We will make sure that the public, meaning workers and employers, become familiar with their obligations, and we will make sure correspondingly that everybody is held to the standard established in the legislation and that legal steps are taken when people breach the law. That is my commitment on behalf of the ministry I have the honor to lead. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those words, I beg, and I'm just looking to make sure I've not left out anything that I wanted to say. With those words, I beg that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Honourable Member St. Peter.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This Honourable House is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, do I have your permission to take the bill in parts?
Yes, permission granted.
Clauses 1 to 10.
Mr. Chairman, at clause 7, I speak to a matter that I alluded to in my wrap-up. At clause 7, in subclause 1, insert the word advanced. Insert after the word advanced the words by way of loan. Number 2, insert after subclause 2 the following. 3, subsection 2 and section 10 do not apply where an employer is a financial institution, credit union, or another entity that provides loans or credit facilities in the ordinary course of its business, and the loan or credit facility to the employee is given as such. 4. In this section, credit union has the meaning assigned to it by Section 193 of the Cooperative Societies Act, Cap 378A. Financial institution has the meaning assigned to it by Section 2 of the Financial Institutions Act, Cap 324A. With that amendment, Mr. Speaker, I beg that clauses 1 through 10, as amended, stand part. Mr. Chairman, I beg that clause 7, as amended, stand part.
The question is, clause 7, as amended, stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I now beg that clauses 1 through 10, as amended, stand part.
The question is that clauses 1 through 10 as amended stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
11 to 20.
Mr. Chairman, at clause 14, clause 14 has 4 subclauses. We will delete, or I propose that we delete subclause 4 and substitute the following. An employer shall not recover an overpayment under subsection 1 or 2 unless he A. notifies the employee in writing of his intention to recover the amount of the overpaid wages or benefit, and the period of notice is no less than that of the employee's pay period, and B. commences the recovery within 1 year of the date of the overpayment. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I beg that clause 14 as amended stand part.
The question is that clause 14 as amended stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, 10 to 20. Mr. Chairman, I now beg that clauses 11 to 20 as amended stand part.
The question is that clauses 11 through to 20 as amended stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 21 to 23.
Mr. Chairman, I beg that clauses 21 to 23 stand part.
The question is that clauses 21 to 23 stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
I put 21 to 33. Why?
Mr. Speaker, at clause 25, and this is because I heard incorrectly the clerk speak to 21 to 24, but I now understand that he had said to 33. So I'm asking for recommittal so that I can go back to clause 25.
You may proceed, Honourable Member.
Right. At clause 25, insert after subclause 5, after subclause 5 of clause 25, 6, no prosecution for an offense under this act shall be instituted after the expiration of 3 years from the date of commission of the offense. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I beg that clause 25 stand part.
The question is
As
that
amended, sorry.
clause 25 as amended stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg now that that clauses 21 to 33 stand part as amended.
The question is that clauses 21 to 33 as amended stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg that you now report to His Honour the Speaker the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill with amendments in committee. Honourable St. Peter.
Mr. Speaker, I do not beg that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I do now beg that this bill do pass and be cited as the Protection of Wages Bill, Act 2026.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Order number 9, sir. Order number 9, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move the passing of a resolution that the Honourable the House of Assembly concur in the amendments made by the Honourable the Senate to the State Acquisition and Vesting of Property Number 2 Bill 2025.
Honourable Leader, Government.
2026.
2026. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the passing of a resolution that the Honourable the House of Assembly concur in the amendment made by the Honourable the Senate to the State Acquisition and Vesting of Property Number 2 Bill 2026.
The question is that this resolution do now pass. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we have come to the end of today's sit-in, and I therefore beg to move the adjournment of the House until Tuesday, the 28th of July at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be adjourned until Tuesday, the 20th day of July at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those who are members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. This honorable chamber stands adjourned until the 20th day of July 2026 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.